When two 7-year-old girls walked into my cafe claiming their CEO father was my blind date, I thought it was a cruel joke. But as rain hammered against the windows and these tiny strangers begged me to give their grieving father one more chance, I realized this wasn't about a missed date. It was about two children desperate to save their broken family. What happened next would either heal us all or shatter what little we had left. Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The cocoa had gone cold an hour ago. Emma Price sat alone at the corner table of Maple Bloom Cafe, her fingers wrapped around the ceramic mug as if the warmth she'd lost could somehow seep back through the porcelain. The cafe hummed with the comfortable sounds of early evening, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of couples sharing dessert, the gentle clink of silverware against plates. But for Emma, the world had narrowed to the relentless ticking of the old clock above the counter and the empty chair across from her. 6:15. He wasn't coming. She'd known it, really, somewhere deep in the part of her that had learned to expect disappointment the way other people expected sunrise. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. Emma had spent 2 hours getting ready, choosing the soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes, braiding her honey blonde hair just so, even daring to wear the lipstick her sister had given her last Christmas with the encouraging words, "You deserve to be seen, Em." But apparently, she didn't deserve to be shown up for. "Another refill, sweetheart?" Mrs. June appeared at her elbow, the cafe's 70-something owner with her cloud of white hair and eyes that saw too much. She'd been watching Emma all evening with increasing concern, her weathered hands gripping the coffee pot like a weapon she might wield against anyone who dared hurt one of her regulars. "No, thank you." Emma's voice came out smaller than she intended. She forced a smile, the kind she'd perfected over years of hiding behind counters and ovens, of making herself as invisible as possible. "I think I'm going to head out." "Emma Price, you sit yourself back down." Mrs. June's tone brooked no argument. "That chair doesn't know what it's missing, and neither does whatever fool stood you up. But you? You're going to finish your evening with dignity, not slink out of here like you did something wrong." Emma's eyes burned with the threat of tears she refused to shed in public. I don't understand." His profile seemed so genuine. Daniel Cole, architect, father of twins, looking for someone who sees the beauty in simple things. She laughed, bitter and sharp. "I guess I wasn't simple enough, or beautiful enough. Or, stop that right now." Mrs. June set the coffee pot down with a decisive thunk. "You're a talented baker, a kind soul, and anyone with eyes can see you're lovely inside and out. If this Daniel character can't see that, then he's blind as well as rude." But Emma had heard it all before: kind, sweet, nice. The words people used when they meant unremarkable, forgettable, not quite enough. 3 years ago, she'd heard different words. Words that still echoed in the hollow spaces of her heart. Her fiancé, Marcus, standing in the room where her wedding dress hung pristine and hopeful, his face twisted with something between pity and contempt. "I can't marry you, Emma. You're too quiet, too small. I need someone who fills a room, not someone who hides in corners baking cookies. You're just not enough." Since then, she'd buried herself in flour and sugar, in the safe solitude of her small apartment and the back room of whatever cafe or bakery would hire her. Online dating had been her sister Rachel's idea. "You can't hide forever, Em. The right person won't make you feel small." But after 6 months and countless failed attempts, Emma was beginning to think that maybe hiding was exactly what she should do. She reached for her purse, fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out enough cash to cover her untouched cocoa and a generous tip. The cafe had filled up since she arrived, families and couples and groups of friends, all wrapped in the golden glow of belonging. Emma felt like a shadow among them, a ghost of loneliness that no one else could quite see. The bell above the door chimed. Emma didn't look up. She was too busy blinking back tears, too focused on gathering her dignity along with her coat. She didn't notice the cafe's chatter diminish slightly, didn't see the way Mrs. June's expression shifted from sympathy to surprise. Excuse me, please." The voice was high and breathless and desperately urgent. Emma glanced up to see two girls, identical twins, maybe 7 or 8 years old, pushing through the cafe tables with single-minded determination. They wore matching pink raincoats, though only one had remembered to zip hers up. Their dark curls were plastered to their foreheads, and their identical brown eyes scanned the room with fierce intensity. They stopped at Emma's table. "Are you Miss Emma?" the taller one asked, though taller was relative, as the difference couldn't have been more than half an inch. "Miss Emma Price?" Emma's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her brain struggled to make sense of the scene. Two children, soaking wet, in the cafe, looking for her. "Yes?" The word came out as a question, uncertain and confused. The second girl, slightly smaller, with a more serious expression, stepped forward. Her hands were clasped in front of her, white-knuckled and trembling, but her chin was lifted with determination that seemed too old for her young face. "Our daddy is Daniel Cole," she said, her voice steady despite the quiver at the edges. "He's your date." The cafe fell silent. Emma heard someone's fork clatter against a plate, heard Mrs. June's sharp intake of breath, heard the espresso machine's hiss die away as the barista turned to stare. But mostly, she heard the rushing of blood in her ears as she tried to process what the child had just said. What? He couldn't come." The taller girl spoke quickly now, words tumbling over each other in their urgency. "But it's not because he forgot you or because he didn't want to come. I'm Lila, and this is Nora, and our daddy is fixing a library that was going to fall down and hurt people, and he sent his assistant to tell you, but she said she would, and then she didn't, and we heard her laughing about it, and—" "We couldn't let him do that to you," Nora interrupted, her serious face creasing with distress, "because he's not that kind of person. He would never, ever just not show up on purpose. Our mom—" Her voice caught. "Our mom died 2 years ago, and he's been so sad, and this was the first time he's tried to meet someone new, and we can't let it be ruined because his mean assistant didn't give you his message." Emma felt like she was falling, even though she was sitting perfectly still. She looked from Lila to Nora, these two rain-soaked girls with their earnest faces and desperate eyes, and saw something that made her chest ache with recognition. Loneliness. The kind that carves out hollow spaces where a family used to be. "Girls," she began softly, "where are your parents? Does your father know you're here?" "He's at the library." Lila pulled out a phone. An adult's phone, Emma noted with growing alarm. "His site on Riverside Avenue. The old building was condemned, but he's been working day and night to save it because it means something to the community. The roof started collapsing this afternoon during the inspection, and he had to stay to make it safe." "We sneaked out," Nora admitted, her serious expression giving way to worry. "Mrs. Chen next door was watching us, but she fell asleep in front of the TV. We took the bus." You took the bus?" Emma's voice rose despite her best efforts. "Do you have any idea how dangerous—" "We know," Nora said quietly. "But we couldn't let you think our daddy doesn't care. Everyone thinks he doesn't care anymore because he works too much and forgets things and doesn't smile like he used to. But he does care. He cares so much that it hurts him." Mrs. June appeared at the table with 3 mugs of hot cocoa topped with whipped cream and cinnamon. She set them down gently, then pulled out chairs for both girls. "Sit," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We'll sort this out, but first, you're both chilled to the bone." The twins hesitated, looking at Emma for permission. She nodded numbly, still trying to catch up with the rapid turn her evening had taken. The girls slid into the chairs, wrapping their small hands around the warm mugs. "Now then," Mrs. June continued, settling into the 4th chair with the air of someone prepared to get to the bottom of things. "Let's start from the beginning. Your father is Daniel Cole, the architect?" "Yes, ma'am." Lila took a careful sip of cocoa, leaving a whipped cream mustache on her upper lip. "He owns Cole Architecture. He designs buildings that honor both function and beauty while serving community needs." She recited the words like a memorized phrase, probably from a website or brochure. "And your mother passed away?" Mrs. June's voice softened with genuine sympathy. Nora's eyes dropped to her mug. 2 years and 4 months ago. Cancer. She made Daddy promise he'd keep living, not just working, but he doesn't know how to do that anymore. He builds things for everyone else, libraries and schools and community centers, but he doesn't know how to fix what's broken for us. Emma's throat tightened. She knew grief, had seen it in her own parents after her grandmother died, had felt its echo in her own losses. But to watch it through the eyes of these two girls who'd lost their mother so young, it was like staring into a well of sorrow that had no bottom. Why was tonight important? Emma heard herself ask. Why a date now? The twins exchanged glances, one of those silent conversations that only siblings, especially twins, could have. Finally, Lila spoke. We made a deal with him. Nora and I, we told him we didn't want to do any more after-school activities, that we wanted to come straight home every day. We just wanted him to be there when we got back, Nora added softly, to have dinner together, to talk, to be a family again, not just three people living in the same house. But Daddy said we needed activities, Lila continued. He said Mom would want us to have full lives, to make friends, to not be sad all the time. So we made a compromise. We joined the drama club and the art class if he'd try to start living again too. If he'd try to find someone who could maybe help him remember how to be happy. Emma felt something crack in her chest, the careful walls she'd built around her heart developing fissures. So he joined the dating app for you? And for him, Nora said, because we think he's lonely too. He doesn't say it, but we hear him sometimes at night in Mom's office, looking at pictures and crying really quiet so we won't know. Mrs. June dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her apron. Lord have mercy, she murmured. That's a heavy burden for such small shoulders. We're not that small, Lila said with a hint of defensiveness. We're almost 8, and we're good at taking care of things. We make our own lunches for school, and we do our homework without being asked, and we don't fight as much as we used to. Because we don't want to make Daddy more sad, Nora explained. He has enough sad already. Emma reached across the table without thinking, covering the girl's small hand with her own. Sweetheart, it's not your job to manage your father's grief. You're children. You should be allowed to be sad too, to fight sometimes, to not have to be perfect. But if we're not perfect, we might lose him too, Nora whispered. And there it was, the fear that had been driving these girls, the terror that lurked beneath their careful maturity. The cafe around them had resumed its normal rhythm, though Emma caught several patrons glancing their way with open curiosity. She should call their father, she knew. Should track down this Daniel Cole and give him a piece of her mind about letting two little girls wander the city alone, deal or no deal. But as she looked at Lila and Nora, at their hopeful faces and their desperate attempt to fix their broken family, she saw herself at that age. Saw the little girl who'd tried so hard to be good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough to earn love. Who'd learned young that being seen meant being judged, and being judged meant being found wanting. Tell me about your father, Emma said instead. What's he like? The twins' faces lit up like sunrise breaking over water. He's really tall, Lila began, and he has kind eyes, even when he's tired. He reads to us every night, even when he gets home really late. Sometimes he falls asleep in the middle of a chapter, but he always remembers where we left off. He makes the best pancakes, Nora added. He puts chocolate chips in them and makes them into funny shapes. He used to do it all the time, but now it's only on special days, like our birthday or Christmas. He never forgets to say, I love you, Lila continued. Every morning before school, every night before bed, and sometimes just randomly when we're watching TV or doing homework, like he needs to remind us, or himself. He draws on napkins, Nora said with a small smile. When we go to restaurants, which isn't very often anymore, he draws pictures on our napkins while we wait for food. Houses and gardens and buildings that don't exist yet. Mom used to collect them in a special box. And he sings in the car, Lila giggled, really badly. Mom used to laugh and cover her ears, but she was smiling. We try to laugh when he does it now, but sometimes it makes him sad because he's remembering her laughing. Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks and didn't bother to wipe them away. He sounds like a good father. He's the best father, both girls said in unison, with such absolute conviction that Emma felt her heart break and heal simultaneously. Then why would his assistant not give me his message? Emma asked, the question she'd been circling back to since this surreal conversation began. The twins exchanged another loaded glance. Miss Veronica doesn't like that Daddy went on a date, Lila said carefully. She gets really mad when he talks about anything that's not work. She says he should focus on building the company, not other things. She wants to marry him, Nora said bluntly. She told her friend on the phone, we heard her. She said once enough time passed, Daddy would realize she was the logical choice. She doesn't like us very much, Lila added quietly. She says we're complications that make Daddy less marketable to investors. Emma's hands clenched into fists on the table. She said that about you? About children? We're not supposed to know, Nora admitted, but she's not very careful about where she talks on the phone, and we're good at being invisible when we need to be. Another crack in Emma's heart. She knew about being invisible, about learning to take up as little space as possible, about hearing things said about you because people didn't think you mattered enough to guard their words. Mrs. June had been silent through most of this exchange, but now she reached across the table and placed her weathered hand over Emma's clenched fist. You know what you have to do, dear, she said softly. Emma looked up at her confused. What? You're going to go to that library, you're going to meet this Daniel Cole, and you're going to give him a chance to explain himself. Mrs. June, I don't even know him, and I can't take his children. We'll come with you, Lila interrupted eagerly. We can show you where it is, and Daddy will be so happy. He was really nervous about tonight. He changed his shirt 3 times and kept asking us if he looked okay. He put on cologne, Nora added. He never wears cologne. And he printed out a list of things to talk about and questions to ask. It's still on his desk. He forgot it when the emergency call came. Emma felt her resolve wavering. She should say no. Should call a taxi for these girls. Wait until their father came to pick them up. And then go home to her quiet apartment and her safe, solitary life. That was the reasonable thing to do. The smart thing. But when had reasonable and smart ever led to anything but more loneliness? If I do this, Emma said slowly, we're calling your father first. He needs to know you're safe. He won't answer, Lila said apologetically. When he's working on something dangerous, he puts his phone away so he can concentrate. He says it's disrespectful to the craft to be distracted. Then we're calling someone. Who's watching you? You said a neighbor? Mrs. Chen, she's really nice but really old. She takes pills that make her sleepy. Emma looked at Mrs. June helplessly. The older woman's expression was firm but kind. I'll call the police non-emergency line, Mrs. June decided. Let them know we have 2 girls here who are safe and sound, and their father is at where exactly? The Riverside Library restoration site, Nora supplied. On Riverside Avenue between 5th and 6th. I'll have the police do a welfare check. Let Mr. Cole know his daughters are here. Mrs. June stood, squeezing Emma's shoulder. But in the meantime, I think there's no harm in a bit of dinner delivery, is there? The poor man's been working through what should have been his evening off. The least we can do is make sure he eats. Emma understood what Mrs. June was really saying. Give yourself permission to take this chance. Stop hiding behind reasonable and smart. Be brave enough to be seen. I'll pack up some sandwiches, Mrs. June continued, already moving toward the kitchen. And some of those heart-shaped sugar cookies you made this morning, Emma, the ones with the strawberry icing. 20 minutes later, Emma found herself in her small Honda sedan with 2 children she'd known for less than an hour, a basket of food in the passenger seat, and a sense of surreality that made her wonder if she'd fallen asleep at her table and was simply having the world's most vivid dream. Lila and Nora sat in the back seat, buckled in carefully, directing her through the rain-slicked streets. The storm had intensified, rain hammering against the windshield in sheets that made visibility nearly impossible. Emma's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, her anxiety ratcheting up with every turn. Left at the next light, Lila instructed, then straight for 3 blocks. How do you 2 know the way so well? Emma asked, her voice tight with concentration. We come here sometimes, Nora admitted. When Mrs. Chen is watching us and Daddy has to work late, we take the bus and bring him dinner. He thinks Mrs. Chen drives us, but she doesn't know how to drive anymore. Her son took her license away. Girls, that's incredibly dangerous, Emma said, trying to keep her tone gentle despite her alarm. Please tell me you don't do this often. Only when it's important, Lila assured her. When we think he's going to forget to eat. He gets really grumpy when his blood sugar is low. and forgetful. Last week he tried to drive home but forgot where he parked his car. And the week before that, he fell asleep at his desk and we had to wake him up for our parent-teacher conference, Nora added. Emma's concern for a man she'd never met deepened with every revelation. This wasn't just grief. This was someone drowning, going through the motions of living while slowly disappearing beneath the weight of loss and responsibility. The library came into view, or what remained of it. The old building was wrapped in scaffolding, its Victorian architecture barely visible beneath the construction equipment and safety barriers. Lights blazed from inside, and Emma could see figures moving through what had once been tall windows. A few other cars were parked haphazardly along the street, and she could hear the distant sound of power tools even through the rain. Park there, Lila pointed to a spot near a temporary fence. And then we have to check in at the security station. Emma gathered the food basket and her rapidly fraying courage. The security guard, a middle-aged man with a kind face and a coffee-stained uniform, looked up in surprise as they approached. "Evening, Lila, Nora," he greeted them with familiar warmth. "Your dad know you're here?" "We brought him dinner," Nora said, which wasn't exactly an answer but apparently satisfied the guard. He turned to Emma. "And you are?" "Emma Price. I'm a friend. Of the girls." The guard studied her for a moment, then nodded and handed her a clipboard with a sign-in sheet and a hard hat. "He's on the second floor, main reading room. Stay away from the east wing. There's still unstable flooring, and keep these two close. Their dad would have my hide if anything happened to them." Emma signed her name with a hand that shook slightly, accepted the hard hat, and followed the twins through the temporary construction entrance. Inside the library was a beautiful disaster, ornate ceiling moldings covered in dust, elegant archways braced with steel supports, the ghost of former grandeur fighting against time and neglect. "This way," Lila tugged her hand, leading her up a temporary staircase that felt far too rickety for Emma's comfort. On the second floor, the space opened into what must have once been a magnificent reading room. High ceilings with skylights, currently covered with tarps that leaked despite their best efforts, soared above them. Rows of empty bookcases stood like sentinels waiting to be filled again. And in the center of it all, surrounded by blueprints and work lights and sawdust, stood a man. Daniel Cole. He looked like his photo, but also nothing like it. The picture had shown a polished professional in a suit, smiling confidently at the camera. This man wore work jeans and a flannel shirt rolled up to the elbows, his dark hair disheveled and his face smudged with dust. He was bent over a blueprint, gesturing emphatically to a woman beside him, a woman in stiletto heels and a designer suit that looked absurdly out of place in the construction zone. "I don't care what the budget says, Veronica," Daniel was saying, his voice carrying exhaustion and frustration in equal measure. "We're not cutting corners on the foundation work. If it's not safe, it's not being built. Period." "Daniel, be reasonable." The woman, Veronica, began, but she stopped mid-sentence as she noticed Lila and Nora rushing toward them. "Daddy!" they called in unison. Daniel's head snapped up, his expression cycling through surprise, confusion, relief, and then sharp concern in the span of a heartbeat. "Lila, Nora, what are you doing here? Where's Mrs. Chen?" But the girls had already reached him, wrapping their arms around his waist. He hugged them back automatically, his hands gentle on their damp hair, but his eyes were already searching the room, looking for an explanation, for the adult who should have been supervising them. His gaze landed on Emma. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the construction-scarred reading room. Emma saw the recognition dawn in his eyes as he connected the dots, saw him understand exactly who she was and exactly what his daughters had done. "Oh, God," he breathed. "Oh my God, you're Emma. You're the date I—" He looked down at his daughters, then back up at her, horror and embarrassment warring on his face. "They went to the cafe, didn't they?" "Daddy, we had to," Lila explained urgently. "Miss Veronica said she'd tell Miss Emma you couldn't come, but we heard her on the phone laughing about it, saying she conveniently forgot, and we couldn't let—" Veronica's face had gone pale, then flushed an ugly red. "I don't know what these children think they heard." "Enough." Daniel's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute authority. He gently disentangled himself from the twins and stood to his full height, and Emma realized they'd been right. He was tall, at least 6'2". Veronica, did you tell me you'd contacted Emma to explain the situation? Daniel, the crisis here required all my attention, and did you or did you not tell me you'd handled it? Veronica's jaw worked silently, her professional composure cracking under his steady gaze. Finally, she lifted her chin defiantly. I did what I thought was best for you. That woman, she gestured dismissively at Emma, would just be a distraction you don't need. You have a company to run, a reputation to maintain, and these girls... Stop talking. Daniel's voice was cold now, colder than Emma had thought possible from the warm-eyed man in the photos. You deliberately sabotaged my personal life, lied to my face, and your defense is that you know what's best for me? I've been with this company for 5 years, Veronica snapped, her composure shattering completely. I've stood by you through everything, through Julie's illness, through the grief, through the chaos of trying to raise children alone. I've picked up every piece you've dropped, covered every meeting you've missed, managed every crisis. And this is how you repay me? By chasing after some nobody who bakes cookies? The reading room went absolutely silent, except for the rain hammering against the tarped skylights. Emma felt herself shrinking, the familiar instinct to disappear, to not cause trouble, to be less than she was. She took a step back, ready to leave, to let these people sort out their drama without her. But then she felt small hands grab hers, one on each side. Lila and Nora had left their father's side and come to stand with her, flanking her like tiny bodyguards. Miss Emma is not a nobody, Nora said with fierce conviction. She's kind and she makes the best cookies, and she didn't have to come here, but she did because we asked her to. That makes her somebody. And she's pretty, Lila added. And she has sad eyes like Daddy, which means she understands about hearts being broken. Daniel looked at his daughters, then at Emma, and something in his expression shifted. The coldness melted, replaced by a profound weariness and a terrible vulnerability. You're right, he said softly, speaking to the twins but keeping his eyes on Emma. She is somebody, and He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it even more disheveled. I owe her an apology, several apologies, starting with, I'm sorry, for tonight, for this situation, for all of it. He turned back to Veronica. Clean out your desk. I'll have HR email you the termination paperwork and a severance package. You're done here. You're firing me? Veronica's voice rose to a near shriek. Over this? Over her? I'm firing you for lying, for insubordination, and for speaking about my children, and about someone I hope to get to know, with such utter contempt. Daniel's voice remained level, but Emma could hear the anger simmering beneath it. You're an excellent assistant, Veronica, but you crossed a line, multiple lines. I hope you find a position where your skills are better appreciated, but it won't be here. Veronica grabbed her designer bag with shaking hands, her face twisted with fury and something that might have been heartbreak. You'll regret this, she hissed. When she realizes what a mess you are, when she can't handle the reality of your life, you'll regret choosing her over someone who actually knows you. She stormed past Emma, close enough that Emma could smell her expensive perfume, and then she was gone, her heels echoing down the temporary staircase like angry punctuation marks. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken things. I brought sandwiches, Emma heard herself say, and then immediately wanted to sink through the floor. Of all the things she could have said in this moment, that was what came out. But Daniel laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound that seemed to release some of the tension in the room. Sandwiches, he repeated. Honestly, that's the most normal thing that's happened all day. He walked toward her slowly, giving her plenty of time to retreat if she wanted to. Emma found herself rooted to the spot, flanked by his daughters, watching this man, this stranger who didn't feel entirely like a stranger, approach with careful, measured steps. Up close, he was more than his photo suggested. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter that had been missing for too long. A scar on his chin that the camera had been kind enough to minimize. Calluses on his hands from actual work, not just desk designing. And yes, those eyes. Hazel and tired and kind, just as his daughters had described. I'm Daniel, he said, offering his hand, though I think you've probably figured that out. Emma. She took his hand, surprised by the warmth of it, by the way his grip was gentle but not weak. And yes, your daughters were very thorough in their introduction. They tend to be. He glanced down at Lila and Nora with an expression of exasperated love. We're going to have a very long talk about leaving the house without permission, taking buses alone, and recruiting strangers into your schemes. Miss Emma's not a stranger, Lila protested. She's your date. A date? I stood up, Daniel said quietly, his eyes returning to Emma's face. Which is inexcusable, emergency or no emergency. I should have called you myself. Should have made sure you knew what happened. I'm so sorry. Emma saw the sincerity in his face, heard it in his voice, and felt something in her chest unclench slightly. Your daughters explained about the library, about the roof collapse. The east wing ceiling came down during the final inspection, Daniel confirmed. No one was hurt, thank God, but it meant staying to make sure nothing else was structurally compromised. I asked Veronica to call you, to explain, and He trailed off, shaking his head. I trusted the wrong person. Why did you trust her? The question came out before Emma could stop it. If you knew she didn't approve of you dating? Daniel's laugh was hollow. Because I'm an idiot? Because I've been on autopilot for so long that I stopped paying attention to the warning signs? He glanced at his daughters, clearly weighing how much to say in front of them. Veronica was Julie's, my wife's, best friend in college. When Julie got sick, Veronica came to help. She'd just gotten her MBA, was looking for work, and I needed someone who could hold my business together while I fell apart. It seemed perfect. But she wanted more than just a job, Emma guessed. I didn't see it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. Julie did, near the end. She told me... He paused, swallowing hard. She told me not to confuse gratitude with love, that when I was ready to move forward, to make sure it was with someone who saw me, not just the gap they thought they could fill. The twins had fallen silent, listening with the intensity of children who rarely heard their father speak about their mother so directly. The sandwiches are probably getting cold, Emma said gently, giving them all an out from the heaviness of the moment. And I brought cookies, heart-shaped ones. You brought us cookies? Nora's eyes widened. Nobody brings Daddy cookies. She's a baker, Lila explained to her sister, as if this was the most wondrous revelation. We told you. They ate sitting on sawdust-covered drop cloths, surrounded by construction equipment and blueprints, in what was possibly the most surreal dinner Emma had ever experienced. Daniel had sent the rest of his crew home once the immediate danger was assessed. They have families to get back to, so it was just the four of them in the echoing space. The twins chattered happily, their earlier tension dissolving in the comfort of food and their father's presence. Daniel watched them with visible relief, occasionally reaching out to tuck a curl behind Nora's ear or wipe a crumb from Lila's cheek with the unconscious tenderness of a devoted parent. And Emma watched all three of them, feeling something unfamiliar unfurling in her chest. Not attraction, though Daniel was handsome in a weary, real sort of way that appealed to her far more than polished perfection. Not even connection exactly, though she felt that too in the quiet spaces between words. It was recognition. She saw herself in this fractured family, saw the way they were all trying so hard to be okay when okay was still so far out of reach. Saw the way Daniel smiled for his daughters, even when his eyes carried grief. Saw the way the twins monitored their father's reactions, adjusting their behavior to accommodate his pain. Saw the careful dance of people who loved each other but didn't quite know how to be whole together anymore. These are incredible, Daniel said, holding up one of the heart-shaped cookies. Did you make these? This morning, Emma confirmed. Mrs. June, the cafe owner, she likes to have fresh baked goods daily. I do the cookies and pastries before my shift. Before your shift? Daniel looked surprised. You work at the cafe? I'm a baker there. Was a baker there. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's not, I know it's not impressive compared to what you do, but Emma, Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. I design buildings. You create things that make people smile. How is that less impressive? Emma had no answer for that. She'd spent so long believing the narrative that Marcus and others had fed her, that her work was small, insignificant, a hobby rather than a craft. that she'd forgotten how to see it any other way. "Can I look at the plans?" The question surprised her as much as it did Daniel. "For the library, I mean, if that's okay." Daniel's expression shifted to something interested and slightly puzzled. "Sure, any particular reason?" "I studied architecture," Emma admitted quietly. 2 years before I switched paths. I've always loved buildings, the way they shape how people interact with space." She stood, brushing crumbs from her jeans, and walked to where the blueprints were spread across a makeshift table. Daniel followed, the twins trailing behind with cookies in hand. Emma bent over the plans, her eyes scanning the layout with a hunger she'd forgotten she possessed. The library was beautiful, a careful blend of historic preservation and modern functionality. Daniel had clearly worked to maintain the building's original character while updating it for contemporary use. But something nagged at her, some detail that felt off. "Here," she said, pointing to the cafe area that had been designed into the ground floor. "This wall placement. It creates a bottleneck between the cafe seating and the reading nook. People will feel like they're intruding on each other's space." Daniel leaned in, studying where she pointed. "The wall is structural. We can't remove it without major reinforcement." "But you could soften it," Emma suggested, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke the language of design she'd thought she'd left behind. "If you add glass panels here and here, maybe with built-in bookshelves, you maintain the structural integrity but create visual connection. The cafe and reading area would feel like one continuous space instead of separate rooms sharing an awkward threshold." Daniel was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between Emma and the blueprint. Then he pulled out a pencil and began sketching modifications in the margin of the plans, his movements quick and sure. "Like this?" he asked, angling the paper so she could see. Emma studied his sketch, then nodded slowly. "Yes, exactly like that. And if you extend the cafe counter to here," she traced a line with her finger, "you create a natural flow pattern. People entering from the main door will be drawn through the space without feeling herded." "The reading nook gets more natural light this way too," Daniel murmured, adding another note. "And if we echo the glass panels in the ceiling treatment above—" He sketched quickly, and Emma watched his vision take shape on paper. It was beautiful. "You have a gift for this," Daniel said quietly, looking up from the plans to meet her eyes. "Why did you stop?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Emma felt the twins watching her, felt Daniel's genuine curiosity, and something else. An understanding that he knew about giving up on dreams, about choosing smaller, safer paths because the big ones hurt too much when you failed. "Someone told me I wasn't good enough," Emma said simply. "And I believed them." Daniel held her gaze. "Were they right?" "No," Emma said, and realized as she spoke that she meant it. "No, they weren't, but by the time I figured that out, I'd already built a different life." "Lives can be rebuilt," Daniel said softly. "Trust me, I'm an architect. I know about structural reform." Lila tugged on Emma's sleeve. "Does this mean you'll go on another date with Daddy? A real one this time, where he actually shows up?" The spell broke, and Emma laughed despite herself. "Subtle, Lila. Very subtle." "I'm not being subtle," Lila said seriously. "I'm being direct. Mrs. Chen says being direct saves time." "Mrs. Chen is wise," Daniel said dryly. He looked at Emma, and she saw vulnerability there, raw and real. "But she's not wrong. I would very much like to try this again, properly. If you're willing to give us, another chance." Emma looked around the construction-strewn library, at this man she'd just met who somehow didn't feel like a stranger, at these 2 girls who'd hijacked her evening and somehow made it better than any proper date could have been. She thought about Marcus, about how he'd made her feel small and forgettable. She thought about all the dates since then that had led nowhere because she'd been too afraid to be seen, too convinced that she was somehow fundamentally not enough. But standing here, covered in sawdust, eating sandwiches on a construction site with a widower and his matchmaking daughters, Emma felt more seen than she had in years. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Yes. Let's try again." The twins cheered, actually cheered, jumping up and down with such enthusiasm that sawdust puffed up around their feet. Daniel's face split into a smile that transformed him, erasing years of weariness and revealing the man he must have been before grief carved him hollow. "Really?" he asked, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Really," Emma confirmed. "But Daniel, next time, call me yourself." "I will," he promised. "I swear, no assistants, no intermediaries, just me. Probably nervous and definitely awkward, but me." "I think I can live with that," Emma said, and found that she meant it. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the city, washing the streets clean and filling the gutters with rushing water. But inside the half-restored library, something else was being restored too. Something more fragile than architecture, but just as important: hope. And sometimes, that's all you need to start rebuilding. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline sunlight that follows heavy rain, as if the world had been scrubbed clean overnight. Emma stood in her tiny kitchen, flour dusting her forearms, trying to focus on the batch of cinnamon rolls rising on the counter instead of replaying the previous evening in her mind for the 100th time. It didn't work. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel smile when she'd agreed to another date, heard Lila and Nora's delighted cheers echoing through the construction site, felt the unexpected warmth that had bloomed in her chest when Daniel had looked at her blueprint suggestions with genuine respect, treating her abandoned architecture knowledge as something valuable rather than a failed dream best forgotten. Her phone buzzed on the counter, startling her out of her reverie. A text from an unknown number. "This is Daniel. Lila insisted I save your number under Emma Who Makes Good Cookies, but I overruled her. Thank you again for last night, for coming, for being kind to my daughters, for not calling the police on them for their unauthorized adventure. Dinner Friday? I promise to actually show up this time. D." Emma read the message 3 times, a smile tugging at her lips despite her best efforts to remain cautious. She was typing a response when her phone rang. Mrs. June's name flashed on the screen. "Good morning, dear." The older woman's voice was warm but carried an undercurrent of concern. "I was hoping you could come by the cafe early today, before your shift. There's something we need to discuss." 20 minutes later, Emma pushed through the cafe's front door to find Mrs. June sitting at the corner table, the same table where Emma had waited for Daniel just yesterday. The coincidence felt pointed, deliberate. "Sit down, sweetheart," Mrs. June gestured to the chair across from her. "Coffee's fresh." Emma sat, accepting the mug Mrs. June slid across to her with growing apprehension. "What's wrong?" Mrs. June didn't waste time on preamble. "I got a call this morning from Richard Chen, owns the building, my landlord. Apparently someone sent him photos from last night. You leaving the cafe with those 2 girls, and some creative speculation about what you might be doing, getting involved with a wealthy CEO and his children." Emma's stomach dropped. "What kind of speculation?" "The ugly kind." Mrs. June's expression hardened. "Suggestions that you're some kind of opportunist, gold digger, that I'm running an establishment where women meet rich men and use their children to manipulate them. It's garbage, all of it, but Richard is concerned about the cafe's reputation." "Mrs. June, I would never. Those girls needed help, and I know that, dear. I was there, remember? I saw exactly what happened and why." Mrs. June reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand. But perception can be a nasty thing, especially in the age of social media. Someone's already posted about it online. Local baker targets grieving CEO through his daughters. The post is gaining traction. Emma felt the familiar sensation of the world tilting, of the ground beneath her feet turning to quicksand. This was Marcus all over again. People making assumptions, creating narratives, deciding who she was without ever asking. She'd spent 3 years rebuilding herself in quiet obscurity, and one evening of choosing to be brave had somehow landed her in the center of a scandal. "I should resign," Emma heard herself say, her voice hollow. "If my being here is going to hurt the cafe—" "You'll do no such thing." Mrs. June's tone turned fierce. "This cafe has weathered worse than internet gossip, and I won't throw you to the wolves because someone decided to stir up trouble. But I do need you to be careful, Emma. Whoever did this, whoever took those photos and twisted what happened, they're not done yet." Emma drove home in a daze, Mrs. June's warning echoing in her mind. She'd texted Daniel back before leaving the cafe, a simple "Friday sounds good" that felt inadequate given the circumstances. Should she tell him about the photos, the rumors? Or would that make her seem paranoid, dramatic, exactly the kind of complicated that made people walk away? Her apartment felt smaller than usual when she returned, the walls pressing in with all the anxieties she'd accumulated over the years. Emma changed out of her work clothes. She'd gone home to shower after the cafe, her shift not starting until afternoon, and was about to collapse on her couch when her phone rang again. Rachel. Her older sister, the successful lawyer with the perfect husband and the perfect brownstone in the perfect neighborhood. The sister who'd been encouraging Emma to date, to get out there, to stop hiding. "Please tell me you're the Emma Price being talked about on Twitter," Rachel said without preamble, her voice crackling with barely suppressed excitement. "Because if you're secretly dating Daniel Cole and didn't tell me, I'm going to be extremely hurt." "I'm not dating anyone," Emma protested, flopping onto her couch with a groan. "I went on one date that he didn't show up for, and his daughters found me and dragged me to a construction site. That's it. That's the whole story." "That's not what the internet says. According to various sources of dubious credibility, you're either a manipulative gold digger or a romantic heroine, depending on which thread you read. Personally, I'm going with romantic heroine, but I'm biased." "Rachel, this isn't funny. Someone took pictures of me leaving with 2 little girls and turned it into something ugly. Mrs. June's landlord is concerned about the cafe's reputation. This could cost people their jobs." Rachel's tone sobered immediately. "Em, who would do something like that? Who even knew about your date?" Emma thought about it. She'd mentioned it to Rachel, to Mrs. June, to a few regulars at the cafe who'd asked why she seemed nervous. But none of them would have. Veronica. The realization hit her like cold water. Daniel's former assistant, who'd been fired last night, who'd made it clear she thought Emma was a nobody who didn't deserve Daniel's attention, who had access to security footage from the library site, who would have seen Emma arrive with the twins. "I think I know who," Emma said quietly. "But I don't know how to prove it. And honestly, I don't know if it matters. The damage is done." "Emma Price, you listen to me." Rachel's voice took on her courtroom tone, the one that made opposing counsel reconsider their life choices. "You spent 3 years letting Marcus's words define you. 3 years making yourself small because one terrible person convinced you that you were somehow less than you are. Are you really going to let some jealous assistant do the same thing? It's different this time." "How?" "Because this time it's not just about me," Emma said, her voice cracking. "It's about 2 little girls who were brave enough to fight for their father's happiness. It's about a cafe that's been a safe space for people for 40 years. It's about Daniel, who's finally trying to move forward from grief. I can't be the person who ruins all of that." "Or," Rachel countered, "you could be the person who fights back, who stands up and tells the truth, who refuses to disappear just because someone wants to make you the villain." They talked for another 20 minutes, Rachel alternating between legal advice and sisterly support, before Emma finally begged off to get ready for her afternoon shift. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, at the woman looking back with tired eyes and flowers still somehow in her hair despite the shower. Rachel was right. She'd spent 3 years hiding. Maybe it was time to stop. Her shift at the cafe was surreal. Several regulars approached her with carefully neutral expressions, asking if she was okay in voices that suggested they'd seen the posts. Others pretended nothing had happened, their studied normalcy somehow worse than open curiosity. And then there were the new faces, people who'd clearly come to catch a glimpse of the woman at the center of the gossip, phones held conspicuously as they pretended to read menus. Emma served coffee and cleared tables and smiled until her face hurt, all while feeling like she was performing in a play she'd never auditioned for. It was nearly 5 o'clock when the cafe door opened and Daniel walked in. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phones appeared from pockets and purses. Even Mrs. June, normally unflappable, paused in the middle of grinding coffee beans to stare. Daniel looked tired. He'd probably been up all night dealing with the library crisis, but determined. He wore jeans and a simple button-down, no tie, no jacket, completely unlike the polished CEO from the photos circulating online. He scanned the cafe until his eyes found Emma behind the counter, and something in his expression softened. "Hi," he said, approaching the counter with the careful steps of someone navigating a minefield. "Bad time?" Possibly the worst time, Emma admitted, hyper-aware of the dozens of eyes watching their interaction. What are you doing here? Damage control, public relations, and honestly, I wanted to see you. He glanced around the cafe, noting the attention they were drawing, and raised his voice slightly. I also wanted to publicly apologize for the mess my former employee created. The photos, the posts, the implications, none of it is true, and all of it is my responsibility to fix. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. Daniel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen so she could see. It was a statement, posted to what appeared to be an official company social media account. Emma skimmed the text, her eyes widening with each line. The statement was direct and unequivocal. It explained the previous evening's events from Daniel's perspective. The emergency at the library, his assistant's failure to communicate, his daughter's well-intentioned but unauthorized attempt to help. It praised Emma's kindness in ensuring the girl's safety and delivering food to a work site, and it announced legal action against anyone spreading false information that damaged Emma's reputation or that of Maple Bloom Cafe. You didn't have to do this, Emma whispered. Actually, I did. Because what Veronica did, what anyone who spread those lies did, is defamation. And I have an entire legal team that's very bored and very expensive, and they assure me we have an excellent case. Daniel's jaw was set with determination. Nobody gets to hurt you or my daughters or this cafe because they're angry at me. Mrs. June appeared at Emma's elbow, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. She set it in front of Daniel with a decisive thunk. On the house, she declared, for men who stand up for what's right. Daniel accepted it with a grateful nod, then turned back to Emma. I know Friday seems far away right now, and I'll understand if you want to cancel. This is a lot to deal with, and we barely know each other. But I need you to know, my daughters haven't stopped talking about you, about how you didn't treat them like they were burdens or complications, about how you looked at my blueprints like they mattered, about how you have sad eyes like Daddy, which apparently means you understand things. Emma felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. They're remarkable girls. They are. And they have terrible judgment when it comes to safety and boundaries, which we're addressing in family therapy starting next week. But their judgment about people? Daniel's smile was crooked and genuine. That's never been wrong. He finished his coffee, left a tip that would have covered 10 drinks, and headed for the door. But he paused at the threshold and looked back. Friday, 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up myself. And Emma, I'm really looking forward to it. After he left, the cafe erupted into speculation and chatter. But Emma noticed something had shifted. The energy felt different, less prurient curiosity, more genuine interest. Mrs. June caught her eye from across the room and nodded with satisfaction. Sometimes, Emma thought, the best way to fight rumors was with truth. Loud, public, unequivocal truth. The rest of the week passed in a blur of new normal. The posts about Emma didn't disappear. The internet had too long a memory for that. But they were buried under Daniel's statement and a surprising groundswell of support from locals who frequented the cafe. Several regulars posted their own accounts of Emma's kindness, her skill as a baker, her quiet presence in the community. It wasn't enough to erase the damage completely, but it was enough to shift the narrative. On Thursday evening, Emma's doorbell rang. She opened it to find a delivery person holding an enormous arrangement of flowers, not roses, but a wildflower assortment that looked like it had been plucked from a meadow rather than carefully arranged in a shop. The card read, "For the woman who saved my daughters and my evening. Also, Lila wanted me to tell you she's been practicing her indoor voice for when we meet again. I have low expectations, but eternal hope." Emma laughed despite herself, burying her nose in the flowers and inhaling their sweet, uncomplicated scent. When had anyone sent her flowers just because? Not for an apology or a special occasion, but simply to make her smile? Friday arrived with Emma's nerves stretched taut as piano wire. She changed outfits 4 times, finally settling on a simple green dress that Rachel had bought her last Christmas, and she'd never had the courage to wear. It hugged curves she usually hid beneath baggy sweaters, and the color brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes that she'd forgotten existed. At precisely 7 o'clock, her doorbell rang. Emma took a deep breath, grabbed her purse, and opened the door. Daniel stood in her hallway looking nervous and hopeful in dark jeans and a gray button-down, holding a small bakery box with a sheepish expression. "I know you're a baker, and this is probably presumptuous, but I stopped by that French patisserie on Lenox Street, and they had these chocolate croissants that Lila and Nora love, and I thought maybe—" He stopped, seeming to realize he was rambling. "I brought you pastries. From a bakery. I'm an idiot." Emma took the box, fighting a smile. "You brought a baker baked goods on a first date. That's either very brave or very foolish." "Can it be both?" Daniel asked hopefully. "Definitely both." Emma opened the box and inhaled the rich scent of butter and chocolate. "But these are from Laurent's, and their croissants are exceptional, so I'll allow it." They took Daniel's car, a sensible sedan that surprised Emma, who'd half expected something flashier given his CEO status. The interior was cluttered with children's drawings, empty juice boxes, and what appeared to be half a toy spaceship. "Sorry about the mess," Daniel said, hastily clearing the passenger seat. "The girls insisted on coming car shopping with me last year, and they vetoed anything that felt too fancy to eat crackers in." "Smart girls," Emma said, settling into the seat that still bore crayon marks on the center console. They drove through the city as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Daniel had chosen a small Italian restaurant in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place locals knew about but tourists never found. It was intimate without being pretentious, warm without being crowded. Over pasta and wine, they talked, really talked, in a way Emma hadn't with anyone in longer than she could remember. Daniel told her about architecture school, about the professor who'd told him that buildings were conversations between past and future, about meeting Julie at a gallery opening where they'd argued for an hour about whether modern architecture respected or erased history, about the moment he'd known he would marry her, not some grand romantic gesture, but a quiet morning watching her sketch designs for a community center, realizing he wanted to watch her create things forever. "I thought I'd never want to talk about her again," Daniel admitted, swirling wine in his glass. "After she died, everyone wanted to share their memories, and it felt like being flayed alive every single time. But with you, I don't know. It doesn't hurt the same way." "Because I didn't know her," Emma said gently. "I'm not trying to keep her alive or help you let her go. I'm just listening." "That's exactly it." Daniel's eyes met hers across the table. "You're not trying to fix anything. You're just here." Emma told him about her own history, about Marcus, about the wedding dress that had hung in her closet for 6 months after he left, because she couldn't bear to look at it but couldn't throw it away. About her parents' well-meaning concern that had slowly transformed into disappointment when she'd abandoned architecture for baking. About the strange comfort she'd found in flour and sugar, in creating things that were meant to be consumed and enjoyed rather than analyzed and judged. "Do you miss it?" Daniel asked. "Architecture?" "Every day," Emma admitted, "but I convinced myself I wasn't good enough, that Marcus was right when he said I didn't have the vision or the courage for it." "He was wrong." Daniel's voice was firm. "I saw what you did with those library plans, Emma. That wasn't luck or accident. That was training and talent and an eye for how people interact with space. That's architecture." They argued playfully about whether modern architecture had lost its soul, about the ethics of gentrification, about the best way to incorporate sustainable design without sacrificing aesthetics. Emma found herself leaning forward, gesturing with her hands, speaking with a passion she'd forgotten she possessed. And Daniel watched her with an attention that felt like being seen under sunlight after years in shadow. Dessert arrived, tiramisu they shared from one plate, taking turns with spoons and stealing bites from each other with increasing boldness. Emma felt young in a way she hadn't in years, untethered from the weight of past disappointments. "I should tell you," Daniel said as they walked to his car after dinner. "The girls have already planned our wedding. It involves a bouncy castle, your heart-shaped cookies as wedding cake, and a ceremony in the library once it's finished. I've tried to explain that we've had one actual date, but they're not hearing it." Emma laughed, the sound genuine and free. "A bouncy castle?" "They're very firm on that point. Also, you'll apparently wear a dress like Cinderella, but less blue, and I'll wear something that makes you look less tired, Daddy." Daniel's smile was rueful. They have opinions. They love you, Emma said simply. That's not opinion, that's fact. They drove back through the city, conversation flowing easy as breathing. Daniel told her about the girls' latest obsession with astronomy, about the telescope he'd bought them that they mostly used to spy on the neighbor's cat. Emma told him about the wedding cake she'd made last month that had nearly collapsed because the bride kept changing the design, about Mrs. June's secret for the perfect pie crust. When they pulled up in front of Emma's apartment building, neither moved to get out of the car immediately. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but charged with possibility. I had a really good time, Emma said finally. Good enough for a second date? Daniel's voice carried hope and uncertainty in equal measure. I think so, though we should probably wait at least a week so your daughters don't start ordering wedding invitations. Daniel laughed, then reached across the console to take her hand. His palm was warm, slightly rough from his work at the construction site, and completely steady. Emma, I need to be honest with you about something. Her heart contracted. Here it came. The but, the however, the reason this couldn't work. I'm a mess, Daniel continued. I work too much because grief is exhausting and work is familiar. I forget to eat and sleep, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced something terrible is about to happen. My daughters deserve better than a father who's still figuring out how to be human again, and any woman who gets involved with me deserves fair warning that I come with a truckload of baggage and two tiny humans who've been through more than any child should have to. He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. But I really, really like you. I like how you look at buildings. I like how you talk to my daughters like they're people, not just extensions of me. I like that you brought sandwiches to a construction site because two strangers asked you to. And I like that when I'm with you, I don't feel like I have to pretend I'm okay when I'm not. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Daniel, you don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know, before this goes any further, before my daughters get more attached, before I get more attached. Emma squeezed his hand, holding his gaze. I like you too, and I'm a mess in my own way. I hide instead of fighting. I convince myself I'm not good enough for anything that matters, and I've spent 3 years baking cookies instead of chasing dreams because cookies can't reject me. But being with you, with Lila and Nora, it makes me want to be braver. Daniel's smile was sunrise breaking over water, transforming his entire face. So we're both disasters trying to figure things out? Sounds about right. Want to be disasters together? Emma laughed through her tears. Yeah, I really do. He walked her to her door, and they stood in the hallway under the flickering fluorescent light that her landlord kept promising to fix. Daniel reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with gentle fingers. I'm going to kiss you now, he said softly. If that's okay. That's okay, Emma whispered. The kiss was sweet and tentative, a question rather than a demand. His lips were soft against hers, his hand cradling her face like she was something precious. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, Emma felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was what it felt like to be chosen, not as a consolation prize or a convenient option, but as someone worth showing up for. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. Friday was worth waiting for, he murmured. It really was, Emma agreed. She watched him drive away, then floated up the stairs to her apartment in a daze. Her phone buzzed with a text before she'd even closed the door. Made it home. Girls are demanding full report. Told them we had spaghetti and talked about buildings. They're disappointed by the lack of drama. Thank you for tonight. For giving me, us, a chance. Sleep well. D, Emma typed back. Tell them the spaghetti was excellent and your company was better. Sweet dreams to all three of you. She fell asleep smiling, flour dust still under her fingernails, her heart fuller than it had been in years. But while Emma slept elsewhere in the city, Veronica Chen sat in her pristine apartment, scrolling through the social media posts about Emma and Daniel with increasing fury. The statement Daniel had posted hadn't just embarrassed her. It had cost her the severance package her lawyer said she might have been able to negotiate. It had cost her reputation in the industry, her connections, her carefully constructed 5-year plan. And it was all because of one insignificant baker who'd gotten lucky. Veronica opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she composed emails to every industry contact she had, every reporter who'd ever covered Cole architecture, every blogger who thrived on corporate drama. If Daniel wanted to play white knight for his little girlfriend, fine. But Veronica knew things about Cole architecture, about the financial struggles after Julie's medical bills, about the projects that had gone over budget, about the clients Daniel had alienated with his grief-driven absences. She'd been loyal for 5 years. She'd saved his company, kept his secrets, covered his mistakes. And this was how he repaid her? By morning, Emma would understand exactly what it meant to date Daniel Cole. And Daniel would learn that some doors, once closed, could never be opened again without consequences. Veronica hit send on the first email and smiled. Sometimes revenge was just good business. Emma woke to 17 missed calls and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Sunlight streamed through her bedroom curtains with the cheerful insistence of a morning that had no idea it was about to become a nightmare. She grabbed her phone, squinting at the screen, and felt her stomach drop as she saw the notifications flooding in. Rachel had called 6 times. Mrs. June 4. Daniel 7. And beneath those were text messages, dozens of them, all saying variations of the same thing. Have you seen the news? Call me immediately. Emma, don't read anything online until we talk. With trembling fingers, Emma opened her browser and typed her own name into the search bar. The results loaded, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The headlines screamed across multiple news sites and blogs. Cole architecture on brink of collapse, CEOs romance a distraction. Inside the financial crisis at Cole Architecture, when grief meets greed. Daniel Cole's dead wife's medical bills nearly bankrupted company. New girlfriend timing, suspicious. Emma scrolled through article after article, each one more damning than the last. They detailed Cole Architecture's financial struggles with surgical precision, the projects that had gone over budget during Julie's illness, the clients who'd pulled contracts after Daniel's grief-stricken absences, the loans taken out to cover medical expenses that insurance wouldn't touch, numbers and dates and cold, hard facts that painted Daniel as a man barely holding his company together. And woven through it all was Emma herself, cast as either a gold digger targeting a vulnerable widower or a naive fool being used to rehabilitate Daniel's public image. One article even included a photo from her failed wedding day. She had no idea how they'd gotten it, with a caption suggesting she had a pattern of targeting successful men. Her phone rang. Rachel. Don't read the comments, her sister said immediately. Emma, I know you've already looked, but whatever you do, don't read the comments section. Too late. Emma's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. The comments were exactly what she'd expected, vicious, speculative, reducing her entire existence to a cautionary tale or a punchline. People who'd never met her had decided who she was, what she wanted, why she deserved whatever happened to her. This is Veronica, Rachel continued, her lawyer voice sharp with certainty. It has to be. Only someone with inside access to Cole Architecture's financials could have leaked this much detail. Daniel needs to sue her into the ground. Rachel, I can't. Emma's breath hitched. I can't be the reason his company falls apart. I can't be the reason his daughters see their father dragged through the media. We've had one real date. One. This isn't worth destroying his life over. Emma Price, you listen to me right now. Rachel's tone turned fierce. This is not your fault. You are not responsible for someone else's vendetta. You are not responsible for protecting Daniel from consequences that aren't yours to bear. And you sure as hell are not going to run away and hide because some bitter woman decided to weaponize private information. But Emma barely heard her. She was already spiraling, already constructing the narrative of how she'd ruin everything she touched, already planning her exit strategy. It was Marcus all over again, except this time she wasn't just disappointing one person. She was potentially destroying a company, damaging 2 little girls' lives, becoming the scandal that would follow Daniel forever. Her phone buzzed with another call. Daniel. She let it go to voicemail, unable to face him, unable to hear the inevitable regret in his voice when he realized what being with her would cost. Instead, she called Mrs. June. I need to take some time off, Emma said before the older woman could speak. A week, maybe 2. I know it's short notice, but I can't I can't come in right now. People will recognize me and they'll make it about the cafe again, and I won't let that happen. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Mrs. June's voice, gentler than Emma had ever heard it. You're running. I'm protecting people I care about. By abandoning them? By confirming every ugly thing those articles are implying about you being weak or opportunistic or whatever other garbage they're spewing? Mrs. June's gentleness gave way to steel. Emma, I've known you for 3 years. You're a fighter, even if you've forgotten how to fight. Don't let them make you small again. But Emma had already made her decision. She told Mrs. June she'd call in a few days, ignored 3 more calls from Daniel, and spent the rest of the morning packing a bag. Her sister had a cabin upstate, empty this time of year. She could disappear for a while, let the scandal die down, let Daniel's life return to normal without her in it. She was loading her car when a vehicle pulled up behind her, Daniel's sensible sedan with the crayon marks and juice box debris. Her heart clenched painfully as she watched him climb out, looking exhausted and determined in equal measure. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Emma couldn't meet his eyes. It's better this way. Better for who? Daniel crossed the distance between them in long strides. Emma, look at me, please. She forced herself to lift her gaze, and what she saw in his face nearly broke her. Not anger or accusation, but understanding mixed with profound sadness. I know what you're doing, Daniel said quietly. You're trying to protect me, protect the girls, protect yourself. But Emma, running away doesn't make any of this better. It just means Veronica wins. She's already won. Emma's voice cracked. She's destroyed your privacy, exposed your company's struggles, made me into exactly the kind of person Marcus said I was. Someone not strong enough to handle real life. Marcus was wrong then, and Veronica is wrong now. Daniel reached for her hands, and Emma let him take them because she was too tired to pull away. Yes, my company struggled. Yes, Julie's medical bills nearly bankrupted us. Yes, there were projects that went over budget and clients who left. But we survived. We rebuilt. And the only reason Veronica knows the details is because I trusted her with them when I shouldn't have. The girls woke up this morning excited because I told them we had a good date. They made me promise to invite you to Nora's art show next week. They're 7 years old, Emma. They're not reading financial blogs or comment sections. They're reading chapter books about dragons and asking if you like strawberry or chocolate ice cream better because they want to know your favorite. Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks. How can you not blame me for this? Your company's private information is all over the internet because you went on a date with me. My company's information is all over the internet because my former assistant is vindictive and I didn't see the warning signs clearly enough. Daniel's grip on her hands tightened. Emma, if I thought for 1 second that being with me was going to hurt you more than help you, I'd walk away. But I don't think that's what you're really afraid of. What am I afraid of then? The words came out bitter, defensive. That you'll try, really try, and it still won't be enough. That you'll open yourself up and I'll leave anyway. That you'll let yourself care about me and my daughters, and we'll decide you're not worth the trouble. Daniel's voice was steady, certain. But here's what I know. You drove 2 strangers' children through a storm because they asked you to. You looked at blueprints like they were poetry. You brought sandwiches to a construction site and flowers to my darkest evening. You're already more than enough, Emma. You always have been. Emma's resolve wavered, cracks spreading through her carefully constructed walls. What if the media won't let this go? What if every time we're seen together, someone writes another article? What if I become the scandal that follows you forever? Then we'll deal with it, together. Or not together, if that's what you really want. But don't leave because you think you're doing me a favor. Don't run because you're scared of being seen as not enough. Run because you genuinely don't want this. Don't want me. Don't want my complicated life. Don't want any of it. But don't run because someone else told you who you're supposed to be. Emma looked at this man, this grieving, stubborn, kind man who'd somehow seen through all her carefully maintained defenses. She thought about Lila and Nora, about how they'd fought for their father's happiness, even when it meant risking punishment. She thought about Mrs. June's words about being a fighter. She thought about the Emma who'd loved architecture, who'd believed she could design spaces that changed how people lived, that Emma wouldn't have run, that Emma would have fought. I'm really scared, she whispered. Me too. Daniel pulled her into his arms, and Emma let herself lean into his strength. I'm terrified. I'm terrified that I'm not ready for this, that I'll fail you the way I failed Julie by being too wrapped up in work. I'm terrified that my daughters will get attached and you'll realize we're too much baggage. I'm terrified that Veronica was right and I'm too much of a mess to be good for anyone. Emma pulled back slightly to look at his face. You didn't fail Julie. I wasn't there enough. When she was sick, I was trying to save the company, trying to secure our future, trying to be the provider she needed. And I missed time I can't get back. She knew you loved her, Emma said with absolute certainty. Your daughters know you love them. That's not failing, Daniel. That's being human. They stood in the parking lot of her apartment building, holding each other while the world spun its stories around them. Eventually, Daniel's phone rang, his business line, which meant it was probably important. He glanced at the screen and sighed. I have to take this. Emergency damage control meeting with my legal team and PR consultants. He cupped Emma's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tear tracks on her cheeks. Will you stay? Will you at least not leave town while we figure this out? Emma thought about her packed bag, about the cabin upstate, about all the times she'd chosen hiding over fighting. Then she thought about two little girls who wanted to know her favorite ice cream flavor, about a man who looked at her like she was someone worth showing up for, about the person she'd been before Marcus convinced her she was too small for big dreams. I'll stay, she said finally. But Daniel, if this gets worse, if the press starts targeting Lila and Nora, then we'll deal with it. But Emma, they're not going to because there's nothing there. You're not a gold digger. I'm not using you for PR. We're just two people who went on a date and liked each other. The truth is boring, which means eventually the media will move on to the next scandal. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, soft and sweet and full of promise. I'll call you after the meeting. And Emma? Thank you for staying, for being brave enough to try. After he drove away, Emma stood in the parking lot for a long moment before finally unloading her bag from the car and carrying it back upstairs. Her phone rang again. Rachel, probably checking to make sure she hadn't fled to Mexico. Emma answered. I'm staying, she said before her sister could ask. Good, because I've been doing some digging, and I think we might have grounds for a harassment lawsuit against Veronica. Also, someone leaked her connection to several previous corporate espionage cases. Turns out your Daniel's former assistant has a history of stealing proprietary information from employers she feels wronged her. She what? She's done this before. 3 times that I can find evidence of, twice resulting in settlements that included NDAs. She's smart about it, waits until she has leverage, then uses insider information to damage the company's reputation when she doesn't get what she wants. In this case, what she wanted was Daniel. Emma sank onto her couch, mind reeling. So this wasn't just about being fired? Oh, it was about being fired. But it was also about 5 years of building toward a goal and having someone else, you, show up and disrupt her plans. She's not just vindictive, Emma. She's calculating. And she made a mistake this time by going after someone with nothing to lose. What do you mean? You're not a company with a reputation to protect. You're not a public figure worried about image. You're a baker who got dragged into a mess not of your making, which makes you sympathetic. And Daniel's legal team knows it. They're going to bury her. The meeting Daniel mentioned stretched from morning into afternoon. He texted Emma periodic updates. Lawyers talking in circles. PR team suggests joint interview to control narrative. Absolutely not. Someone brought terrible coffee, and I miss your cookies. Each message made Emma smile despite the churning anxiety in her stomach. At Maple Bloom Cafe, Mrs. June was dealing with her own crisis. The morning rush had brought not just regulars but reporters, actual journalists with cameras and microphones, asking about Emma, about Daniel's visit to the cafe, about the scandal. Mrs. June had thrown them all out with the kind of righteous fury that would have made her Methodist minister mother proud. This is a place of peace and good coffee, she'd declared, wielding a wooden spoon like a weapon. Not a circus for vultures. Get out, and don't come back until you remember how to be decent human beings. But the damage was spreading. By noon, Richard Chen called again. The cafe's landlord was facing pressure from other tenants in the building. from business partners, from people who thought being associated with that scandal cafe was bad for their own reputations. "I'm sorry, June," Richard said, and he did sound genuinely apologetic. "But I have to think about the building as a whole. Maybe it's time to consider selling. You've had a good run, but nothing, Mrs. June interrupted. "I've been in this location for 40 years, Richard. 40 years of serving this community, of being a safe space for people who needed one. And you want me to sell because some bitter woman spread lies on the internet? Because a young baker dared to go on a date with someone successful? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. And if you can't see that, then maybe I need to talk to a lawyer about whether trying to force me out over manufactured scandal violates the terms of my lease." She hung up before Richard could respond, her hands shaking with anger and fear. The cafe was her life's work, her legacy. She'd weathered economic downturns and changing neighborhoods and the rise of chain coffee shops. But she'd never faced anything quite like this. The weaponization of narrative, the way truth could be buried under speculation and half-facts. That evening, Emma finally ventured out to the cafe despite her earlier promise to stay away. She arrived after closing when the chairs were upturned on tables, and Mrs. June was counting the register with reading glasses perched on her nose. "I'm so sorry," Emma said from the doorway. "Mrs. June, I never meant—" "Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault." The older woman looked up, and Emma was shocked to see tears in her eyes. "Emma, dear, I've been thinking about why this has gotten so ugly, so fast. And I think it's because you represent something people don't want to acknowledge." "What's that?" "That second chances exist, that broken people can heal, that grief doesn't have to be permanent, and loneliness doesn't have to be forever." Mrs. June came around the counter, taking Emma's hands in her weathered ones. "Daniel lost his wife and spent 2 years drowning. You lost your confidence and spent 3 years hiding. And when you found each other, when two broken people started to heal together, it made everyone who's still broken uncomfortable. Because if you can do it, then they have to ask why they can't." Emma felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. "I don't know if I'm healing. I feel like I'm barely holding it together." Healing isn't neat or linear, dear. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it means standing in a parking lot deciding whether to run or stay. And you stayed. That's healing. They sat together in the quiet cafe, drinking tea and not talking about the reporters or the articles or the uncertain future. Eventually, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Meeting finally over. Can I see you? I know it's late, but I have something to tell you. Something good, I think." Emma showed the message to Mrs. June, who smiled and shooed her toward the door. "Go." "And Emma? Whatever happens next, you're stronger than you think. Remember that." Daniel was waiting outside Emma's apartment building, leaning against his car in the evening darkness. He looked exhausted, but relieved to see her, pulling her into a hug before she could even say hello. "I have news," he said into her hair. "Some good, some complicated." They went up to her apartment. Daniel's first time seeing it, Emma realized with a flutter of self-consciousness. It was small but cozy, filled with plants and the lingering scent of vanilla from the candles she burned while baking test recipes. Daniel looked around with genuine interest, pausing at the small shelf where she'd displayed some of her architecture school projects. "You kept these," he said softly, touching the edge of a building model she'd made in second year. "I couldn't throw them away, even when I thought I'd never use any of it again." Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious. "My legal team thinks we have a strong case against Veronica for corporate espionage, breach of confidentiality, and defamation. She's done this before. Rachel was right about that. But here's the complicated part." Emma braced herself. "Going after her publicly means more media attention, more scrutiny, potentially a trial that could drag on for months, with every detail of my company's finances and my personal life picked apart in court. It means protecting my business and your reputation, but at the cost of privacy and peace. And the alternative? We accept a settlement offer her lawyers have already floated. She pays damages, signs an NDA that prohibits her from ever discussing me or my company or you again, and this ends quietly. No trial, no more headlines, no prolonged battle." Emma studied his face, reading the conflict there. "You want to fight her?" Part of me does. The part that's angry about what she did to my daughters, to you, to the company Julie and I built together. But the bigger part, the part that's a father, just wants it over. I want to take my girls to school without worrying about cameras. I want to take you on a date without checking to see if we're being followed. I want normal, Emma, or as close to normal as we can get. What does your legal team recommend? They say fight. They say people like Veronica need to face consequences, or they'll do it again to someone else. And they're probably right. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar after just one date. But I keep thinking about what Julie said near the end, about how the most important thing wasn't winning or being right. It was being present for the people who mattered. Emma moved closer, taking his hands. Then let it end. Take the settlement. Let her sign her NDA and disappear. Because Daniel, they're right that she might do this again. But that's not your responsibility to prevent. Your responsibility is to your daughters and to yourself and to building a life that's about more than fighting battles. Relief washed over Daniel's features. You're sure, because this affects you too. If we settle, people might think the allegations had merit, might think we're hiding something. Let them think what they want. The people who matter, your daughters, Mrs. June, my sister, they know the truth. Everyone else is just noise. Daniel pulled her close, and they stood in her small living room holding each other while the weight of the decision settled around them. Eventually, he pulled back with a small smile. The girls made you something. I wasn't sure if I'd see you tonight, but I have it in the car. They went back down to retrieve a large envelope that had been decorated with stickers and glitter. Inside were 2 drawings, one from each twin. Lila had drawn Emma standing in front of the library, holding a tray of cookies, with a speech bubble that said, "Welcome to the best library ever." Nora's was more abstract, showing Emma, Daniel, and the 2 girls holding hands under a rainbow, with careful lettering at the bottom. Our new family. Emma felt her eyes burn with tears. Daniel, they barely know me. They know enough. They know you didn't run when you could have. They know you brought their dad sandwiches and looked at his blueprints like they mattered. They know you stayed even when things got hard. He touched the edge of Nora's drawing gently. Kids don't overthink things the way adults do. They just know how people make them feel. How do I make them feel? Safe? Seen. Like maybe losing their mom doesn't mean they can never have someone else to love them. Daniel's voice roughened. Like maybe our family could grow instead of just staying broken. Emma looked at the drawings, at these tangible representations of hope from 2 children who'd learned far too young that life could be cruel and uncertain. She thought about how easily she could have missed all of this. If she'd stayed home that first night, if she'd refused to take the twins to the library, if she'd run this morning instead of staying. I want to meet them properly, Emma said, not at a construction site or through a dramatic rescue, just normal. Ice cream or the park or whatever 7-year-olds do. Daniel's face lit up with a smile that erased the exhaustion and stress. Nora has an art show at school next Wednesday. Would you come? It's very serious business. There's a punch bowl and everything. I'll be there. They talked until late, curled up on Emma's worn couch with tea growing cold in mugs they forgot to drink. Daniel told her about the settlement terms, generous enough to fund repairs to his company's financial reserves, restrictive enough that Veronica would never be able to weaponize insider information again. Emma told him about Mrs. Bus, June's landlord troubles, about her fear that the cafe might close because of association with the scandal. What if I commissioned the cafe to run the library cafe space? Daniel said suddenly. We're going to need someone to manage it anyway, and Mrs. June has 40 years of experience. We could draw up a contract that ensures she has stable income even if the Maple Bloom location closes. She could run both, or just the library one, whatever makes sense. Emma stared at him. You'd do that? I'd do it because it's a good business decision. The library cafe needs someone who understands community, who creates spaces where people feel welcome. That's Mrs. June. Daniel's smile turned slightly mischievous. Plus, it would give you a reason to be at the library more often. To consult on design elements. Make sure the flow between spaces works. Daniel Cole, are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to do what you loved before someone convinced you that you weren't good enough. No pressure, No timeline, just think about it. Because that library needs someone who sees buildings as more than functional spaces. Someone who understands how architecture can change lives. Emma felt something crack open in her chest. A door she'd kept locked for 3 years. A possibility she'd stopped letting herself imagine. I don't have my degree. I'd need to go back to school, finish my certification. So finish it. Take classes part-time while you work. I'll write you a recommendation if you need one. Hell, I'll hire you as a consultant right now if it helps you believe that you're capable of this. Daniel's voice was fierce with conviction. Emma, stop finding reasons why you can't and start asking yourself if you want to. I want to, she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. God, Daniel, I really want to. Then do it. Not for me, not for anyone else. Do it because you deserve to chase the dreams you set aside. Do it because you're talented and passionate, and you see spaces the way most people see poetry. They kissed then, soft and slow and full of promise. And when Daniel finally left, reluctantly, after Emma reminded him that his daughters would wake up early and wonder where he was, Emma sat in her apartment surrounded by architecture models and twin-drawn pictures and the fragile, terrifying hope that maybe her life was about to change. The settlement with Veronica was finalized within 72 hours. The media attention didn't disappear immediately, but it shifted. New scandals emerged, other stories captured headlines, and gradually the interest in Daniel and Emma's relationship faded to background noise. There were still occasional articles, still comment sections full of speculation, but the fever pitch had broken. Mrs. June accepted Daniel's cafe proposal with tears in her eyes and hands that shook as she signed the contract. You're giving me a second act, she told him. At 73, I thought my story was mostly written, but this feels like a whole new chapter. The landlord troubles didn't disappear overnight, but the pressure eased once it became clear that Maple Bloom Cafe would be operating the library space. Suddenly, being associated with the cafe was good business rather than scandalous, and Richard Chen stopped calling with concerns about reputation. And Emma filled out applications to finish her architecture degree, her hands shaking as she typed essays about why she'd left and why she wanted to return. She worked her shifts at the cafe, tested recipes for the library space, and let herself imagine a future that looked nothing like the small, safe life she'd constructed after Marcus. On Wednesday evening, she drove to Lila and Nora's elementary school for the art show. The hallways were decorated with student work, and the gymnasium had been transformed into a gallery space with proud parents clustering around their children's creations. Emma felt out of place, uncertain, until she spotted Daniel across the room. He was standing with the twins, all 3 of them in front of Nora's display. When he saw Emma, his face broke into a smile that made every moment of uncertainty worth it. Lila spotted her next and immediately broke away from her father, running across the gym with Nora close behind. Miss Emma, you came! Did you see Nora's painting? It's the best one here, even better than Tyler Johnson's, and his mom is an actual artist. Emma let herself be dragged to the display, where a watercolor painting showed a building, the library, she realized, surrounded by flowers and people holding books and smiling. In the corner, almost hidden, were 4 figures holding hands. A family. It's beautiful, Emma said honestly, crouching down to Nora's eye level. You have real talent. Nora's serious face cracked into a shy smile. Daddy says talent is just practice plus passion. I practice a lot, and I'm very passionate about libraries. She's passionate about you too, Lila stage whispered. She made you the pretty one in the painting. See? That's definitely your hair. Emma looked at the figure that was supposed to be her, rendered in careful detail with honey-colored hair and a blue dress. Next to her was Daniel, tall and solid. And between them, each holding a hand, were Lila and Nora. The family that hadn't existed a month ago but was slowly, carefully beginning to take shape. Thank you, Emma told Nora, her voice thick with emotion. I'm honored to be in your painting. They wandered through the art show together, this instant, imperfect family, looking at other students' work and eating cookies from the refreshment table that Daniel declared inferior to Emma's. Other parents stared, some recognizing them from the news coverage, but Daniel ignored them with the ease of someone who'd learned to tune out noise. As they were leaving, Lila took Emma's hand on one side while Daniel held the other. Nora grabbed her father's free hand, and they walked to the parking lot like that, connected, together, visible in a way that would have terrified Emma just weeks ago. "Ice cream?" Daniel suggested. "There's a place nearby that Lila swears has the best mint chocolate chip in the city." "It does," Lila confirmed solemnly. "It's scientifically proven." "I don't think you can scientifically prove ice cream quality," Emma said, amused. "You can if you try enough flavors. It's called research, Miss Emma." They piled into Daniel's car, Emma in the passenger seat, the twins in the back arguing good-naturedly about whether mint chocolate chip was better than cookies and cream. And as they drove through the city toward the ice cream shop, Emma realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't making herself small or apologizing for taking up space. She was living. Messy and imperfect and visible, but living. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. The ice cream shop was nearly empty on a Wednesday night, which suited them perfectly. They claimed a corner booth with cracked vinyl seats and a table that wobbled unless you folded a napkin under one leg. Lila insisted on sitting next to Emma, while Nora squeezed in beside her father, and they ordered enough flavors to constitute a proper research study into the scientific properties of frozen dessert excellence. "So, Miss Emma," Lila said around a spoonful of mint chocolate chip, "are you going to be our daddy's girlfriend now? Like, officially?" Daniel choked on his cookies and cream. "Lila, we've talked about this. About giving people space and not rushing things. But you like her. We can tell. You smile different when you talk about her. It's the same smile you had in pictures with Mommy before she got sick." The table went quiet. Emma saw Daniel's hand tighten on his spoon, saw the way Nora went very still beside him. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the moment when Julie's ghost would materialize between them, a reminder that Emma was trying to fill a space that already belonged to someone else. But then Nora spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Mommy would like Miss Emma. She always said Daddy needed someone who could see past his grumpy face to his good heart, and Miss Emma sees that. We can tell." Daniel's eyes were suspiciously bright. "You remember your mom saying that?" "I remember lots of things. I remember her telling us that loving someone new wouldn't mean forgetting her. That hearts don't have a limit on how much love they can hold." Nora looked at Emma with those serious eyes that seemed too old for 7. "Do you have room in your heart for us? Even though we're complicated and we miss our mom and sometimes we cry at weird times?" Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks and didn't bother to hide them. "I have room. And Nora? Everyone cries at weird times. That's what makes us human. Mrs. Chen says crying is just feelings leaking out when they get too big to stay inside," Lila added helpfully. "Like when a pot boils over because there's too much water." "Mrs. Chen is very wise," Emma managed, her voice unsteady. They finished their ice cream while the twins chattered about school and upcoming field trips and the neighbor's cat, who they were convinced was actually a spy. Daniel caught Emma's eye across the table and mouthed, "Thank you." And she understood what he meant. "Thank you for not running. Thank you for seeing my daughters as people, not obstacles. Thank you for being here." When they finally left the shop, sticky with sugar and full of laughter, Daniel walked Emma to where she'd parked near the school. The twins were already buckled into his car, visible through the windows as they played some kind of hand-clapping game in the back seat. "They love you already," Daniel said quietly. "I should probably tell you to be careful with that, but honestly, I'm right there with them." Emma's heart stuttered. "Daniel, I'm not saying I love you. Not yet. We've known each other 2 weeks, and I'm not that impulsive anymore." He reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her jaw. "But I could. Love you, I mean. I can feel myself heading in that direction like a train that's already left the station. And it terrifies me because the last time I loved someone, I lost her. But it also feels right in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever feel again." Emma pressed her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. "I'm scared too. Scared that I'll mess this up, that I won't be enough for them, or for you. That 3 years of hiding made me forget how to be brave when it matters. You drove my daughters through a storm to bring me sandwiches. You stayed when you could have run. You're at an elementary school art show on a Wednesday night when you could be home safe and comfortable. Daniel's smile was crooked and genuine. Emma, you've been brave every single day since we met. You just haven't noticed. They kissed in the parking lot while the twins giggled and made exaggerated kissing noises from Daniel's car. When Emma finally drove home, she felt lighter than she had in years, as if some weight she'd been carrying had finally been set down. The next 2 weeks unfolded with a tentative rhythm that began to feel like routine. Emma worked her cafe shifts, took evening classes online to start fulfilling the requirements for her architecture degree, and spent increasing amounts of time at the library renovation site. Daniel had officially hired her as a design consultant, a title that felt both thrilling and terrifying, and she found herself sketching modifications and discussing spatial flow with his construction team like she'd never stopped studying architecture. Mrs. June watched this transformation with approval and occasional exasperation. "You're blooming, dear," she said one morning as Emma presented ideas for the library cafe layout. "But don't forget to sleep occasionally. And eat. You've been living on coffee and determination for days." "Says the woman who works 12-hour shifts at 73, Emma countered. "I've earned the right to be foolish with my health. You're young. Pace yourself." But pacing felt impossible when Emma's life was expanding faster than she could process. She had dinner with Daniel and the twins twice a week, casual affairs involving takeout and homework help, and the comfortable chaos of family life. She met with architects and contractors and learned the language of construction permits and building codes. She stayed up late filling out financial aid applications and writing essays about her renewed passion for design. And slowly, carefully, she began to believe that maybe Marcus had been wrong. Maybe she was enough. 3 weeks after the ice cream shop conversation, Emma was at the library site reviewing cabinet specifications when her phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a local area code. "Hello? Emma Price? This is Janet Morrison from Riverside Community College's architecture department. I'm calling about your application for readmission." Emma's heart stopped. She'd submitted the application 2 weeks ago, but hadn't expected to hear back so soon. "Yes, that's me. I have to say, your application essay was compelling. The section about how personal setbacks led you to understand architecture as more than aesthetics, as a framework for rebuilding lives, really resonated with our admissions committee." Emma gripped the phone tighter. "Thank you. I meant every word." "I can tell. Which is why I'm pleased to inform you that you've been accepted for the spring semester. You'll be able to transfer most of your previous credits, which means you're looking at approximately 18 months to complete your degree if you take a full course load." Emma had to sit down. She found a sawhorse and sank onto it, barely processing Janet's words about registration deadlines and financial aid packages and orientation dates. She'd been accepted. They wanted her back. After 3 years of believing she'd thrown away her chance, she was being given another one. "Miss Price, are you still there?" "I'm here. Thank you. Thank you so much." After she hung up, Emma sat amid the construction debris and unfinished walls and cried. Not from sadness or fear, but from relief so profound it felt physical. She cried for the girl who'd stood in a wedding dress and believed she wasn't enough. She cried for the 3 years she'd spent hiding. She cried for the version of herself who'd given up on dreams because someone else had told her to. And she cried because she was being given a chance to become who she was meant to be. Daniel found her there 20 minutes later, mascara running down her face, surrounded by lumber and power tools. He took one look at her, and his face creased with concern. "Emma, what's wrong? What happened?" "I got in," she managed through tears. "The college. They accepted me. I can finish my degree." Relief flooded Daniel's features, followed by joy so pure it transformed him. He pulled her up from the sawhorse and spun her around, right there in the unfinished library, both of them laughing, while construction workers pretended not to notice. "I'm so proud of you," Daniel said when he finally set her down. "God, Emma, I'm so proud. I haven't done anything yet. I just got accepted. You did everything. You faced your fear. You applied. You put yourself out there despite every reason you had to hide. That's not nothing. That's everything." They celebrated that night with the twins at Daniel's house, the first time Emma had been invited to his home rather than meeting at restaurants or the library. It was a beautiful old craftsman that Julie had apparently decorated with an eye for both comfort and style. Her presence was everywhere, in the family photos on the mantel, in the artistic touches throughout the rooms, in the twins' bedrooms that still held handmade quilts she'd sewn before getting too sick to work. Emma expected to feel like an intruder, but instead she felt welcomed by the ghost of a woman she'd never met. Julie smiled from photographs with the kind of warmth that suggested she'd been generous with her love, and the home she'd created spoke of someone who understood that beauty and function weren't opposing forces, but complementary ones. "You can feel her here," Emma said quietly as Daniel gave her a tour. "In a good way, like she's still part of this place." "She is. She always will be." Daniel paused in the doorway of what had been Julie's office, now a combination workspace and memorial, with her design sketches on the walls and her books still on the shelves. "I used to think loving someone new would mean erasing her, but I'm starting to understand that's not how it works. She's part of my foundation, and you—" He turned to face Emma. "You're part of what I'm building forward." Dinner was pizza and salad, and the twins' enthusiastic retelling of Emma's acceptance. They'd grasped immediately that this was important, and they celebrated with construction paper congratulations cards, decorated with glitter and drawings of buildings. "When you're an architect, will you design us a treehouse?" Lila asked. "A really good one with a rope ladder and a telescope?" "The best treehouse ever built," Emma promised. "Better than Tyler Johnson's? Because his has a slide." "Way better. Ours will have secret compartments." After dinner, they watched a movie curled up on the couch. Daniel on one end with Nora tucked against his side, Emma on the other with Lila sprawled across her lap. Halfway through, both girls fell asleep, and Emma and Daniel found themselves whispering over their sleeping children like actual parents. "This feels real," Emma said softly, "like we're becoming something that could last." "It scares you," Daniel observed. "It terrifies me. What if I mess up? What if I'm not good at this, at being part of a family, at helping raise daughters who've already been through so much? Then we'll mess up together. Emma, there's no perfect way to do this. Julie and we fought about parenting styles and made mistakes and had to apologize to our kids more times than I can count. The goal isn't perfection, it's presence." Emma looked at Lila's sleeping face, peaceful and trusting. "They deserve someone better than me. They deserve someone who loves them, someone who shows up, someone who sees them as people worth fighting for." Daniel reached across the sleeping children to take Emma's hand. "You're already doing that. Everything else we can figure out as we go." The following week brought new complications. Emma's acceptance to the architecture program became public knowledge. Someone from the college had mentioned it to a local reporter covering education stories, and suddenly Emma was being framed as the gold digger who's now pursuing architecture suspiciously close to her CEO boyfriend's field. The narrative was absurd, but it gained traction in certain corners of social media where people were still convinced Emma had orchestrated everything from the beginning. "Let it go," Rachel advised when Emma called her in tears. "You could cure cancer and someone would accuse you of doing it for attention. Focus on what's real. School, Daniel, those girls. Everyone else is just noise." But the noise was getting harder to ignore. Emma started receiving messages on social media, some supportive, many cruel. Strangers felt entitled to opinions about her relationship, her education, her worth as a person. One particularly vicious thread dissected every photo of her that existed online, criticizing everything from her appearance to her career choices to her obvious social climbing. Daniel wanted to respond, wanted to defend her publicly, but Emma stopped him. "It'll just make it worse, trust me. Engaging with trolls never ends well." "So we just let them tear you apart?" "We let them talk themselves out. Eventually they'll find someone else to target. That's how the internet works. Short attention span, endless supply of targets." She was right, but it didn't make watching it happen any easier. Daniel found himself checking Emma's social media accounts obsessively, reporting the worst comments, documenting everything in case they needed legal action later. His daughters noticed his preoccupation and worried in their own ways, Lila by asking too many questions, Nora by going quiet and watchful. "Daddy, are people being mean to Miss Emma?" Lila finally asked one night at dinner. Daniel weighed his response carefully. The twins were 7, but they weren't babies. They'd been through enough loss to understand that the world wasn't always kind. "Some people are saying unkind things, yes, But Miss Emma is strong, and she's not letting it stop her from doing what makes her happy. We should make her more cards, Nora decided, with extra glitter. That always makes people feel better. I think that's an excellent idea. They spent the evening creating cards with messages like, "You're the best almost family member ever," and "Don't listen to mean people. They're just jealous of your cookies." Daniel took photos of the twins working, their faces serious with concentration, and sent them to Emma with the message, "Your fan club is very concerned about your well-being." Emma's response came quickly. "Tell them I love them, and I love their cards, and I love—" There was a pause in the typing indicator, then, "I love that they think glitter solves problems. They might be onto something." Daniel noticed what she hadn't said. He noticed the way she'd started to type, "I love you," and then redirected. He noticed because he'd been doing the same thing, catching himself before saying words that felt both inevitable and too soon. They'd known each other just over a month. A month. People didn't fall in love in a month, except sometimes they did. The library renovation reached a critical milestone in late November. The main reading room was structurally complete, and it was time to start thinking about interior finishing. Daniel organized a walkthrough for key stakeholders, including Mrs. June, who'd be running the cafe space, and Emma, who'd been consulting on the design elements. Walking through the nearly finished space took Emma's breath away. The room soared with elegant proportions, the restored Victorian details complementing the modern safety features seamlessly. The cafe area she'd suggested modifications for flowed naturally into the reading nooks, and the glass panels Daniel had added created sightlines that made the entire floor feel connected without sacrificing the intimacy of separate spaces. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, turning slowly to take it all in. "Daniel, it's absolutely beautiful." "It's what you saw that first night," he said, coming to stand beside her. "When you looked at the blueprints and understood what this space could be, I just brought your vision to life." Mrs. June was examining the cafe area with a critical eye, making notes about counter heights and electrical outlet placement. "This will work," she announced. "Emma, dear, you have a gift for this. Don't let anyone tell you different." The walkthrough attracted other attention, too. A photographer from the city's architecture magazine had been documenting the restoration, and she took dozens of photos of Emma and Daniel discussing design elements, of Mrs. June measuring spaces, of the building itself in all its renewed glory. When the magazine published its spread 2 weeks later, the photos told a story of community and creativity and second chances. And the internet, predictably, had opinions. Most were positive. The article framed Emma's consulting work as evidence of natural talent rather than opportunism, and several prominent architects commented publicly about the quality of the spatial design. But there were still detractors, still people convinced that Emma was playing a long game, using Daniel for access to a career she didn't deserve. "Deserve," Emma said bitterly to Rachel over coffee. "Like careers are something you earn through moral purity rather than hard work. Like I haven't spent 3 years baking at 4 in the morning because I loved making things that brought people joy. Like that doesn't count as paying dues." "You know what your problem is?" Rachel stirred her latte with more force than necessary. "You still care what they think. You're still trying to prove you're worthy when you've never needed to prove anything. You're talented, you're kind, you're doing the work. That's enough." "But what if it's not? What if I get my degree and I'm still not good enough? What if I fail Daniel's expectations or mess up a design or—" "Then you'll learn from it and do better next time." That's what life is, Em. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up and trying and picking yourself up when you fall. You've spent 3 years hiding because you fell once. Don't waste another 3 years hiding because you might fall again. Emma knew her sister was right, but knowing and believing were different things. She threw herself into her coursework with obsessive focus, determined to prove, to herself if no one else, that she belonged in architecture school. Her professors noticed immediately, commenting on her maturity and perspective compared to younger students who'd come straight from high school. "You've lived," one instructor told her, after she presented a design project focused on community spaces for grief support. "You understand what buildings are for, not just shelter or aesthetics, but healing. That's rare." The holiday season approached with its particular brand of emotional complexity. Emma had always found Thanksgiving and Christmas difficult, reminders of family expectations and personal failures, of the life she'd thought she'd have versus the reality she'd built. But this year felt different because Daniel and the twins kept asking what her traditions were, what she liked to do, whether she'd spend the holidays with them. "I don't want to intrude," Emma protested when Daniel invited her to Thanksgiving dinner. "That's family time." "You are family," Lila said with the blunt certainty of a 7-year-old. "You're with us all the time anyway. You might as well be there for turkey, too." "Lila's right," Daniel agreed. "Emma, you're part of our lives now. I don't want to do holidays without you. The girls don't want to do holidays without you. Please say you'll come." So Emma found herself on Thanksgiving Thursday in Daniel's kitchen, helping prepare a meal while the twins helped by sneaking bites of everything and periodically running through the house in costume pieces from their dress-up box. It was chaotic and messy, and nothing like the formal, quiet Thanksgivings of Emma's childhood. It was perfect. They ate at Daniel's dining table with its mismatched chairs and cheerful chaos, and when they went around saying what they were grateful for, Nora said, "Miss Emma," without hesitation. Lila added, "Miss Emma's cookies," which made everyone laugh, and Daniel met Emma's eyes across the table with an expression that said, everything words couldn't. After dinner, while the twins were occupied with a movie, Daniel and Emma did dishes together in comfortable silence. Emma washed, Daniel dried, and somewhere in the rhythm of ordinary tasks, Emma realized she'd stopped being afraid. "I love you," she said, the words emerging naturally between one plate and the next. "I know it's fast and probably too soon, and maybe I shouldn't say it, but I do. I love you and your daughters and this messy, complicated life we're building." Daniel set down the plate he'd been drying and turned to face her fully. "Emma Price, I have been waiting for you to say that so I could say it back without freaking you out. I love you too. I've loved you since you looked at my library blueprints like they were poetry. Maybe before that. Maybe from the moment my daughters walked into that cafe and chose you." They kissed with dishwater hands and the sound of animated characters singing in the background, and it was completely unromantic and absolutely perfect. Later that night, after Emma had gone home and the twins were in bed, Daniel sat in Julie's office looking at her picture. "I hope this is okay," he told the photograph. "I hope you'd approve. She's nothing like you. She's quieter, more uncertain, still figuring out who she is. But she loves our girls. And she makes me remember what it feels like to look forward instead of back. I think you'd like her. I think you'd be glad I found her." The photograph, of course, said nothing, but Daniel thought Julie's smile looked approving, and that would have to be enough. December arrived with cold weather and the stress of final exams. Emma was juggling schoolwork, cafe shifts, library consulting, and increasing time with Daniel's family. Something had to give, and it turned out to be sleep. She functioned on coffee and determination, showing up to everything but slowly unraveling at the edges. Daniel noticed but didn't push, having learned that Emma needed to figure things out for herself. But when he found her asleep at his kitchen table one evening, head pillowed on her architecture textbook while the twins did homework around her, he decided intervention was necessary. "Emma, sweetheart, wake up." He gently shook her shoulder. "You can't keep doing this to yourself." Emma jerked awake, disoriented and embarrassed. "I'm fine. I was just resting my eyes for a second." "You were snoring," Lila informed her helpfully. "Loudly." "I don't snore." "You definitely snore," Daniel confirmed. "And you have textbook creases on your face. Emma, you're running yourself into the ground. Something's got to give." "I can handle it." "Nobody's saying you can't, but you don't have to handle everything alone. Let me help. Let Mrs. June help. Let the people who love you share the load instead of watching you burn out." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, but she was so tired. Tired of trying to be enough. Tired of proving herself. Tired of carrying everything solo because asking for help felt like admitting weakness. "I don't know how to let people help," she admitted quietly. "I've been doing everything myself for so long." "Then learn. Start small. Stay here tonight instead of driving home exhausted. Let me make you dinner. Let the girls entertain you with their very dramatic retelling of today's playground politics. Let yourself rest." So Emma stayed. She borrowed one of Daniel's t-shirts to sleep in, and the twins insisted she read them bedtime stories in voices that made them giggle. And when Daniel found her afterward, curled up in his guest room looking small and vulnerable, he sat on the edge of the bed and brushed hair back from her forehead. "You don't have to be perfect," he said softly. "You don't have to earn your place here. You just have to be yourself, messy, tired, overwhelmed, human. That's all any of us can be." Emma caught his hand, holding tight. "What if myself isn't enough?" "It always has been. You just haven't let yourself believe it." She fell asleep holding his hand, and Daniel sat there for a long time watching her breathe, marveling at how someone so uncertain of her own worth could have changed his entire world in 6 weeks. The semester ended with Emma passing all her classes with grades that surprised her, high marks and instructor comments praising her insight and creativity. She'd proven to herself that she belonged, that she could do this, that Marcus's assessment had been wrong all along. The library renovation neared completion on a timeline that seemed impossible. The official opening was scheduled for January 15th, and as the date approached, Daniel seemed increasingly nervous about something he wouldn't discuss. "It's nothing," he insisted when Emma asked. "Just normal pre-launch jitters." But Emma knew him well enough now to recognize evasion. She let it go, trusting he'd tell her when he was ready. What she didn't know was that Daniel had been planning something. Something big. Something that would either be the most romantic gesture of his life or a spectacular disaster. He'd been working with Mrs. June in secret, preparing a surprise for the library's opening day. Something that would show Emma exactly how he saw her, not as someone still trying to prove her worth, but as someone who'd already changed everything. The surprise involved the library itself, the entire community, and a declaration that would make it impossible for Emma to hide anymore. Daniel just hoped she was ready to be seen. The morning of January 15th dawned cold and crystalline, the kind of winter day where everything looked sharp-edged and impossibly clear. Emma stood in her apartment bathroom, hands trembling slightly as she attempted to put on mascara for the 3rd time. The library opening was in 2 hours, and she'd been awake since 4 in the morning, alternating between excitement and paralyzing anxiety. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "The girls are demanding to know what you're wearing so they can coordinate. I've explained that's not how this works, but they're not convinced. Also, I miss you. Is it weird that I miss you when I saw you 12 hours ago?" Emma smiled despite her nerves and typed back, "Tell them I'm wearing blue. And no, it's not weird. I miss you too." She'd chosen a simple navy dress that Rachel had helped her pick out, elegant without being pretentious, professional without being stuffy. Emma barely recognized herself in the mirror. This woman had styled hair and makeup and confidence in her posture. This woman looked like someone who belonged at an architectural unveiling, not someone who spent most mornings covered in flour. When had she become this person? And more terrifying, what if it all disappeared as quickly as it had arrived? Mrs. June picked her up at 9, looking resplendent in a burgundy suit that made her seem taller than her modest 5'3". "Ready for your big day, dear?" the older woman asked as Emma climbed into the passenger seat. "It's not my big day. It's Daniel's. I just helped a little with some design elements." "Emma Price, after everything we've been through, are you really still trying to make yourself small?" Mrs. June's voice was gentle but firm. "You redesigned the flow of that entire ground floor. You created spaces that will serve this community for generations. Own it." They drove through the city as it woke up, past coffee shops opening their doors, and early risers walking dogs, and the ordinary magic of a Tuesday becoming extraordinary. The library came into view as they turned onto Riverside Avenue, and Emma's breath caught at the sight. The Victorian building had been transformed. Scaffolding was gone, revealing restored brick and gleaming windows. A banner hung across the front announcing "Grand Opening Today" in letters large enough to read from blocks away. And cars were already filling the parking lot, community members arriving early to witness the unveiling. "There are so many people," Emma whispered. "It's a big deal. This building was going to be demolished. Daniel saved it, yes, but you made it somewhere people will actually want to be. That matters, Emma." Inside, controlled chaos reigned. Caterers were setting up refreshment tables, audiovisual technicians were testing microphones, and Daniel's construction team was doing final walkthroughs to ensure every detail was perfect. Emma spotted Daniel across the lobby, surrounded by people with clipboards and questions, looking overwhelmed but handling it with the calm competence she'd come to love. He saw her and his entire face transformed. He excused himself from his conversation and crossed to her in long strides, pulling her into a hug that lifted her off her feet. "You're here. Thank God. I've been drowning in last-minute crises and I needed to see your face." Emma laughed into his shoulder. "I told you I'd be here. Where are the girls?" Rachel picked them up an hour ago. "They're in the children's section putting final touches on some kind of surprise they've been working on. They've sworn me to secrecy, which means I have no idea what they're planning, and I'm mildly terrified." "Your daughters are angels." "My daughters are chaos in human form, but I love them anyway." Daniel set her down but kept his arms around her waist. "There's something I need to tell you before everything starts. Something I should have mentioned earlier, but I was worried you'd try to talk me out of it." Emma's stomach tightened with apprehension. "Daniel, what did you do?" Before he could answer, a woman in a professional pantsuit approached with a tablet and an apologetic expression. "Mr. Cole, the mayor just arrived and would like to speak with you before the ceremony. Also, the photographer from City Living magazine is here and wants to get some shots of the building before it fills up." Daniel closed his eyes briefly in frustration. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Emma, cupping her face in his hands. "We'll talk after. But Emma, trust me, okay? Trust that I'm doing this for the right reasons." He kissed her quickly, thoroughly, and then he was swept away by obligations and schedules, leaving Emma standing in the lobby with Mrs. June and a growing sense that she'd somehow lost control of the narrative of her own life. "What do you think he meant?" Emma asked. Mrs. June's smile was knowing and slightly secretive. "I think you should go check on those girls. They're probably getting into trouble without supervision." Emma found Lila and Nora in the children's section, which had been designed with input from local teachers and librarians. Low shelves created intimate reading nooks, colorful rugs defined play spaces, and child-height windows let in natural light without sacrificing the room's cozy atmosphere. The twins were putting finishing touches on a display that made Emma's heart clench. It was a timeline of the library's restoration, told through photographs and captions clearly written in a child's careful printing. But woven throughout were pictures of Emma, consulting with contractors, sketching modifications, standing with Daniel, looking at blueprints. One photo showed her laughing with construction workers during a lunch break. Another caught her kneeling to examine tile placement, her expression serious and focused. "Girls, what is this?" Lila looked up from arranging photos with pride written across her features. "It's the story of how our library got saved. Daddy said every good building has a story, and this is ours." "But you included me. I wasn't that important to the project." Nora fixed her with that too serious gaze. "Miss Emma, you were important to us. And Daddy says buildings aren't just about bricks and wood. They're about the people who care enough to make them matter. You cared." Emma crouched down to their level, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "You two are something special. You know that?" "We know," Lila said matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Chen says we're precocious. We looked it up. It means we're smart for our age." "It definitely means that." Rachel appeared in the doorway, looking polished and professional in lawyer mode. "There you are. Em, I need to steal you for a minute. Mrs. June says you need to see something before the ceremony starts." Emma followed her sister through hallways that were beginning to fill with arriving guests. City council members mixed with neighborhood residents, architecture students clustered near columns to discuss restoration techniques, and children ran between adults with the unselfconscious energy of people in a space designed to welcome them. Rachel led her to what would become Mrs. June's cafe space. The area was still partially set up, with equipment covered in protective plastic and furniture not quite arranged. But on the main wall, visible from anywhere in the cafe and extending into the adjacent reading area, was something Emma hadn't seen before. A dedication plaque, beautifully designed and clearly custom-made. But instead of the generic acknowledgement she'd expected, the text made her freeze. "The Riverside Library Ground Floor. Design Consultation by Emma Price. In recognition of her vision in creating spaces where community and comfort intersect, where function serves beauty, and where every person who enters feels seen and welcomed. Architecture is not just about buildings, it's about building hope. Below that, in smaller text, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is try again. This library stands as testament to second chances, for buildings, for dreams, and for hearts brave enough to rebuild. Emma's hands flew to her mouth as tears started streaming down her face. He didn't. Rachel, tell me he didn't do this. He absolutely did. He also fought the Historical Society and the City Council and about 6 different committees to get permission to put your name on this wall. Apparently, he was very insistent that your contribution deserved recognition. But I don't have my degree yet. I'm not certified. People are going to think, they're going to think exactly what's true, that you're talented, and you contributed meaningfully to this project and you deserve credit for your work. Rachel grabbed Emma's shoulders, forcing her to meet her eyes. Emma, stop. Stop finding reasons to diminish yourself. Daniel is giving you credit you earned. Accept it. Be proud of it. Let yourself be seen. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 11. By 10:30, every seat in the main reading room was filled and people were standing along the walls. Emma found herself in the front row between Mrs. June and Rachel, with Lila and Nora squirming excitedly on either side of Daniel, who sat at the end of their row. Local news cameras were set up in the back, and the energy in the room vibrated with anticipation. The mayor spoke first, discussing the importance of preserving historic buildings and serving community needs. A representative from the Historical Society talked about the restoration process and architectural significance. And then Daniel took the podium, looking nervous in a way Emma had rarely seen. "Good morning, and thank you all for being here," he began, his voice carrying through the sound system. 2 years ago, this building was condemned. The structural damage was significant, the cost of repair seemed prohibitive, and most people assumed it would be demolished to make way for something modern and efficient. He paused, his eyes finding Emma in the crowd. "But this community fought for it. You showed up to meetings, you wrote letters, you refused to let history be erased for convenience, and you reminded me why I became an architect in the first place. Not to build monuments to ego or profit, but to create spaces where people's lives unfold in meaningful ways." Daniel's voice grew stronger, more confident. "This library almost didn't survive, just like some of us almost didn't survive our own personal collapses. But buildings, like people, can be restored. They can be made stronger in the broken places. They can be given new purpose while honoring what they once were." He pulled a small object from his pocket. Emma couldn't quite see what it was from her seat, and held it up. "When I first met the woman who would become my design consultant on this project, she brought me heart-shaped cookies. I was working through the night, stressed and exhausted, and convinced I had to carry everything alone. And she showed up with food and kindness and a perspective I desperately needed." Emma's breath caught as she realized what he was holding. One of her heart-shaped cookies, preserved somehow, half of it broken off, but the other half intact. "I broke this cookie that night," Daniel continued. "But I kept the pieces because they reminded me that even broken things are still beautiful. That cracks don't mean worthless, they mean human." He set the cookie on the podium and pulled out blueprints, unfolding them for the audience to see. "These are the original plans for this floor, functional, safe, but not inspired. And this," he unfolded a second set, "is what it became after Emma Price looked at them and saw not just a building, but a community. She saw how people would move through the space, where they'd want to gather, how light and openness could serve both privacy and connection." Emma wanted to sink through the floor. Everyone was looking at the blueprints, comparing them, murmuring appreciatively about the changes. The news cameras had zoomed in on the drawings. She was being publicly credited with work she still wasn't sure she deserved credit for. "Emma told me she stopped pursuing architecture because someone convinced her she wasn't good enough," Daniel said, his voice softening. "And I'm standing here today to publicly declare that person was wrong. Not just wrong, catastrophically, completely, unforgivably wrong." He gestured around the room. "This space exists because Emma saw possibilities I'd missed. The cafe flows naturally into reading areas because Emma understood that community happens when spaces invite it. The children's section feels magical because Emma remembered what it was like to be young and scared and needing a place that felt safe." Daniel's eyes were locked on Emma now, speaking to her even as he addressed the crowd. I'm a trained architect with 15 years of experience and degrees from prestigious schools. But Emma, with 2 years of interrupted education and 3 years of doubt, saw things I couldn't see. Because talent isn't just about training, it's about how you understand people and spaces and the way they intersect. He stepped down from the podium, crossing to where Emma sat. She was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it, and Lila had grabbed one of her hands while Nora held the other. Daniel knelt in front of her chair, pulling out a folder Emma hadn't noticed him carrying. "This is a contract," he said, his voice now for her alone even though the microphone picked it up. "A formal offer for you to join Cole Architecture as a junior designer once you complete your degree. Starting salary, benefits, and a mentor program where you'll work directly with me and our senior team. You'll have your own projects, your own clients, and full credit for your work." Emma couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. This was too much, too public, too everything. "I'm not offering this because we're together," Daniel continued. "I'm offering it because you're talented and you bring something to architecture that can't be taught. You understand that buildings are for people, not for portfolios. You see spaces the way some people hear music. And Emma," his voice cracked slightly, "I want to spend my career learning to see things the way you do." The room erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, and Emma could hear Mrs. June beside her crying happy tears. Rachel was squeezing her shoulder. The twins were bouncing in their seats with barely contained excitement. And Daniel was still kneeling in front of her, holding out a contract that represented everything she'd thought she'd lost forever, waiting for her answer. "I don't understand," Emma whispered, though the microphone carried her words through the room. "Why would you do this? In front of everyone? Why not just ask me privately?" Daniel's smile was tender and knowing. "Because you've spent years hiding, Emma. Years making yourself invisible, because someone told you that you weren't worth seeing. And I needed you to understand, needed everyone to understand that you're not invisible. You never were. You're brilliant and talented, and you deserve to be acknowledged publicly, proudly, without apology." He stood, pulling her to her feet with him. "I'm not proposing marriage, even though my daughters have opinions about that too. I'm not asking you to be anything other than exactly who you are. I'm just asking, will you let yourself be seen? Will you take the job and the credit and the career you've earned? Will you stop hiding?" Emma looked around the room at faces watching with anticipation and goodwill. She saw her architecture professors from the college who'd somehow been invited. She saw Daniel's construction team who she'd worked alongside. She saw community members who'd smiled at her during planning meetings. She saw her sister and Mrs. June and 2 little girls who looked at her like she hung the moon. And she saw Daniel, this man who'd entered her life through chaos and stayed through scandal, who'd seen past her carefully constructed walls to the person she'd been trying to protect from further disappointment. "I'll take the job," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "And Daniel, thank you for making me stop hiding." The room exploded with applause again. Daniel pulled her into a hug while the twins crashed into both of them, creating a tangle of arms and laughter. And somewhere in that moment, Emma felt the last pieces of Marcus's assessment of her worth finally, completely shatter. She wasn't too quiet. She wasn't too small. She wasn't not enough. She was exactly who she was supposed to be. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. The mayor cut the ceremonial ribbon, guests toured the facility exclaiming over architectural details, and Emma found herself surrounded by people congratulating her, some genuinely, others with barely concealed skepticism that she chose to ignore. The catering company Mrs. June had hired served food in the new cafe space, and Lila and Nora gave enthusiastic tours of the children's section to anyone who'd listen. Emma was examining the dedication plaque, still unable to believe her name was on it, when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Impressive work, really, I mean that." She turned to find a man she hadn't seen in 3 years standing a respectful distance away. Marcus. Older, his hairline receding slightly, his expression difficult to read. Emma's first instinct was to run or hide or make herself small. Her second was to call for Daniel, but her third, the one she chose, was to simply stand her ground and wait for him to explain what he was doing there. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," Marcus continued when Emma didn't respond. I came because I saw the article in City Living magazine about the restoration and your involvement, and I needed to. He stopped, struggling with words in a way Emma had never seen him struggle. You needed to what? Her voice was calm, neutral. Apologize for what I said when I ended things, about you being too quiet, too small, not enough. Marcus ran a hand through his thinning hair. I was cruel and I was wrong, and I've spent 3 years knowing I was wrong but being too much of a coward to admit it. Emma studied him. This man who'd shaped 3 years of her life through his absence and his harsh assessment. And she felt nothing. No anger, no vindication, no desire to make him hurt the way he'd hurt her. Just a distant sort of pity for someone who'd let his own insecurity damage another person. Why now? She asked. Why apologize now after 3 years? Because I saw your work and realized you'd become exactly what you were meant to be despite what I told you. And I saw the way that architect, Cole, talked about you in the article with so much respect and admiration, and I realized I'd been so focused on what I needed that I never saw what you could be. Marcus's voice was heavy with regret. I'm not asking for forgiveness or another chance. I'm just saying I was wrong. About all of it. And I'm sorry. Emma thought about the person she'd been 3 years ago, young and uncertain and so desperate to be chosen that she'd accepted criticism as truth. She thought about the person she'd become, still uncertain sometimes, still learning, but no longer willing to make herself small to fit someone else's expectations. Thank you for the apology, she said finally. It's more than I expected and probably more than I needed. But Marcus, I've spent 3 years letting your words define me. I'm not going to spend another minute on them. Not with anger, not with forgiveness, just by moving forward. She turned back to the plaque, effectively ending the conversation. After a moment, she heard Marcus's footsteps retreating, and Emma felt something fundamental shift, the last hold her past had on her present finally releasing. Daniel appeared at her elbow minutes later with 2 glasses of champagne. I saw Marcus talking to you. Do I need to have security escort him out, or possibly punch him? I've never punched anyone, but for you I'd learn. Emma laughed and took one of the glasses. Stand down, protective boyfriend. He apologized. It was anticlimactic, actually. Turns out when you stop needing someone's approval, their apology doesn't mean as much. That's very mature and healthy of you. Personally, I'm still team punch him. Noted for future reference. Emma clinked her glass against his. This is really happening, isn't it? The library, the job offer, all of it? It's really happening. And Emma, I meant what I said up there. This isn't charity or nepotism or me trying to keep my girlfriend close. You're genuinely talented. The work you did here proves it. I'm offering you the job because I'd be an idiot not to. They stood together watching people explore the library, watching community members discover spaces that would serve them for decades. And Emma let herself feel proud. Proud of her contribution, proud of her growth, proud of the woman she was becoming. The afternoon stretched into evening. Most guests departed, but a core group remained, Mrs. June organizing the cafe space with military precision, Daniel's construction team doing final equipment checks, Rachel entertaining the twins who were getting punchy with exhaustion. Emma found a quiet corner in the main reading room and just sat, absorbing the reality of the space she'd helped create. She thought about the girl who'd waited alone in Maple Bloom Cafe 2 months ago, convinced she was destined for loneliness. She thought about 2 little girls brave enough to chase down their father's date to give him a second chance. She thought about Daniel, who'd somehow seen past her carefully constructed invisibility to the person hiding underneath. Miss Emma? Nora's voice interrupted her reverie. The twins approached hand in hand, their earlier energy replaced by contemplative quiet. Hey girls, shouldn't you be going home? It's getting late. Daddy's talking to reporters, Lila explained. We wanted to ask you something first. Emma patted the bench beside her, and both girls climbed up, flanking her like bookends. Nora spoke first, her serious face even more grave than usual. Are you going to stay? Like, forever? Emma's heart clenched. What do you mean? People leave, Nora said simply. Mom didn't want to, but she had to. And Mrs. Chen's daughter moved away and never visits. And our teacher, Miss Rodriguez, left to have a baby and didn't come back. People always leave. So we need to know, Lila continued, her voice small and uncertain in a way it rarely was. Are you the kind of person who stays? Because if you're not, we need to know now, before we love you too much. Emma felt tears burning in her eyes. These children, these brave, broken, brilliant children who'd been through more loss than anyone should experience, were asking for a guarantee she wasn't sure she could give. How could anyone promise forever? How could she swear she'd never hurt them when life was so uncertain? But then she thought about the question differently. They weren't asking for a guarantee against death or disaster. They were asking if she'd choose to stay when staying got hard, if she'd keep showing up when things were messy and complicated and difficult, if she was the kind of person who ran at the first sign of trouble or the kind who stood her ground. Emma pulled both girls close, one under each arm. I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen. I can't guarantee I'll be here forever because life doesn't work that way. But I can promise this. I will never choose to leave you. I will never walk away because things get hard or because I decide you're too much work or because I find something better. If you'll let me, I will stay for as long as you'll have me. So you're not going to leave when Daddy gets grumpy or when we have bad days or when things are hard? Lila pressed. Nope. I happen to like you guys even when you're grumpy and having bad days. Maybe especially then. What about when we're adults and don't need you anymore, Roshot? Nora asked. Emma kissed the top of her head. Sweet girl, I hope you always need me at least a little bit, just like I need you. So you love us? Lila's voice was very small. Yeah, I really do. I love you both so much it scares me sometimes, because love means being brave enough to stay even when it's scary. The twins burrowed closer, and Emma held them while the library settled into evening quiet around them. This was family, she realized. Not perfect or traditional or uncomplicated, but real, messy and uncertain and absolutely worth fighting for. Daniel found them like that. Emma, with a twin tucked under each arm, all three of them drowsy with emotional exhaustion. He stood in the doorway for a moment just watching, his expression so full of love that Emma felt her breath catch. Hey, he said softly. Ready to go home? And the way he said home, like it was a place that included her, a space she belonged, made Emma understand that she'd found what she'd been looking for all along. Not someone to complete her or fix her or prove she was enough, just someone to see her clearly and choose her anyway. Yeah, Emma said, carefully extracting herself from the twins who were both half asleep. Let's go home. 3 months later, Emma stood in the Cole Architecture office on her first official day as a junior designer. Her desk was in a corner with natural light, and someone, she suspected Daniel, had left a vase of wildflowers and a plate of heart-shaped cookies as a welcome gift. Her degree completion was still months away, but the job contract had included provisions for her to work part-time while finishing school. She'd spend mornings in classes, afternoons at the office, and evenings still helping Mrs. June at the cafe when needed. It was exhausting and exhilarating and exactly what she wanted. Emma Price? A woman poked her head into the office space. I'm Sarah Chen, senior architect. Daniel asked me to get you set up and oriented. Welcome to the team. Emma gathered her things and followed Sarah, feeling that familiar flutter of inadequacy trying to creep in. But this time she recognized it for what it was. Not truth, but habit. And habits could be changed. That evening she had dinner at Daniel's house, an increasingly common occurrence that was starting to feel less like visiting and more like coming home. The twins had art projects spread across the dining table, and Daniel was attempting to cook something that smelled suspiciously like burning. I'm ordering pizza, Emma declared after inspecting the smoking pan. Whatever you're attempting has suffered enough. I'm a terrible cook, Daniel admitted cheerfully. Julie used to say I could burn water. I've been faking competence through takeout and cereal. They ate pizza on the living room floor while the twins chattered about their day and argued about whose turn it was to pick the movie. And somewhere in the comfortable chaos, Emma realized she'd stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Stopped expecting everyone to suddenly realize she wasn't worth the trouble. Later, after the twins were in bed and Emma was gathering her things to leave, Daniel caught her hand. Stay, he said simply. Not in a moving-in way or a big commitment way, just stay tonight. I like falling asleep knowing you're here. The girls like waking up and seeing you at breakfast. We all just... We like when you're here. Emma thought about her small apartment, about the solitary life she'd constructed as protection. She thought about the risks of letting people get too close, of allowing herself to need them, of building a life that could be destroyed if things fell apart. And then she thought about two little girls who'd asked if she was the kind of person who stayed, about a man who'd seen past her fear to her potential, about the version of herself who was emerging, braver, stronger, more certain of her own worth. "Okay," Emma said, "I'll stay." She stayed that night, and the next, and gradually her things migrated from her apartment to Daniel's house until the line between visiting and living blurred entirely. 6 months after the library opening, she officially moved in, and they told the twins over breakfast on a Saturday morning. "Does this mean you're really part of our family now?" Lila asked, syrup dripping from her fork. "It means I'm not going anywhere," Emma confirmed. "If you'll have me." "Of course we'll have you," Nora said with her characteristic seriousness. "You're already ours. This just makes it official." The library cafe opened to immediate success, with Mrs. June running it with the same warmth and wisdom she'd brought to Maple Bloom. The original cafe location closed quietly, but the legacy continued in the new space, and regular customers followed Mrs. June to the library without hesitation. Emma completed her architecture degree with honors and became a full-time member of Cole Architecture's team. Her specialization became community-focused design, spaces that served people's emotional needs as much as their functional ones. Grief centers, community gathering spaces, affordable housing that prioritized dignity, these became her passion and her portfolio. 2 years after that first chaotic evening when two little girls had walked into a cafe looking for their father's date, Daniel proposed. Not publicly this time, but privately, in the library's reading room late on a Tuesday evening after everyone had gone home. "I know the girls have been planning our wedding since they met you," he said, kneeling in front of her in the space they'd designed together. "And I know this might seem fast by some standards, but Emma, I've spent 2 years watching you become who you were always meant to be, and I want to spend the rest of my life continuing to witness that. Will you marry me?" Emma looked at this man, this grieving, stubborn, kind man who'd seen her clearly when she couldn't see herself and felt certain in a way she'd never been before. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding was small and perfect, held in the library surrounded by books and light and community. Lila and Nora were joint maids of honor, wearing matching dresses and carrying bouquets of wildflowers. Mrs. June officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose, and Rachel stood beside Emma, tears streaming down her face as she watched her younger sister finally claim the happiness she'd always deserved. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising not perfection, but presence. Promising to stay even when staying was hard. Promising to keep building their life together. One day, one choice, one moment of courage at a time. And when they cut the wedding cake, a towering creation Emma had baked herself, decorated with heart-shaped cookies and love, Lila announced loudly that she'd told everyone this would happen 2 years ago and nobody had believed her. "We should have listened," Daniel said, pulling Emma close. "These two always know what they're talking about." 5 years after that first missed date, Emma stood in the office of Cole Architecture, looking at blueprints for a community center in an underserved neighborhood. Her design incorporated flexible spaces that could serve multiple purposes: after-school programs, job training, grief support groups, community meals. It was her biggest project yet, and she was terrified and excited in equal measure. Daniel appeared at her elbow with coffee and a kiss on her temple. "How's it going?" "I think I'm designing something that matters," Emma said quietly. "Something that will actually change people's lives." "That's what you do," Daniel said simply. "That's what you've always done. You just finally believe it." At home that evening, Lila and Nora, now 12 and infinitely more sophisticated than their 7-year-old selves, were doing homework at the kitchen table. They called Emma M now instead of Miss Emma, and they rolled their eyes at Daniel's dad jokes with the weary patience of preteens everywhere. But when Emma walked in, they both looked up with smiles that hadn't changed since they were small. Smiles that said, "You're home, and we're glad, and this is where you belong." "How was your day, Em?" Nora asked. "Pretty good. How was school?" Tyler Johnson said his dad could design a better community center than you, Lila reported with the indignation of someone whose family had been insulted. I told him his dad mostly designed strip malls, and you design spaces that heal people. Then I might have accidentally spilled juice on his project. Lila, Emma said, trying to sound stern and failing. We don't sabotage other people's work, even when they're being rude. Fine. Next time I'll just tell him the truth, that you're the best architect in the city and he's just jealous. That's not... Emma started, but Daniel was laughing, and Nora was nodding in agreement, and she realized something fundamental. She'd stopped arguing when people said she was talented, stopped deflecting compliments or minimizing her accomplishments. She'd learned to let herself be seen, fully, honestly, without apology. That night, after the girls were in bed and Emma and Daniel were curled up on the couch with tea and comfortable silence, Daniel pulled out his phone and showed her something. It was an email from a young woman, 23 years old, architecture student, explaining that she'd read about Emma's path from failed engagement to successful architect, about how Emma's story had convinced her to return to school after dropping out when her professor told her she'd never make it in a male-dominated field. She wants to know if you'd mentor her, Daniel said. Be the person for her that you needed when you were starting over. Emma read the email twice, tears gathering in her eyes. I don't know if I'm qualified to mentor anyone. Emma Price Cole, you're a licensed architect with award-winning designs and 5 years of experience. You're extremely qualified, but more than that, you understand what it's like to doubt yourself, to be told you're not enough, to have to rebuild from broken pieces. That makes you exactly the person she needs. So Emma said yes to mentoring, and then she said yes when other young architects reached out, and gradually she found herself doing speaking engagements at architecture schools about resilience and second chances and designing with empathy. She told her story, the wedding dress in the closet, the 3 years of hiding, the 2 little girls who'd refused to let their father's date think he didn't care. She told it honestly, including the parts that made her uncomfortable because she'd learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the foundation on which everything strong was built. 10 years after that first missed date, Emma stood at a podium accepting an award for her community center design. Daniel and the girls were in the audience, the twins now 17 and preparing for college, still rolling their eyes at their parents but fiercely protective of the family they'd fought to create. In her acceptance speech, Emma talked about how she'd almost given up on architecture, how one person's harsh assessment had convinced her she wasn't good enough, how she'd spent years hiding in safety because trying and failing seemed worse than never trying at all. But here's what I've learned, Emma said, her voice steady and clear. You can't architecture your way to a life without risk. You can't design a space so perfect that nothing bad ever happens there. Buildings crack and shift, and sometimes they need major repairs. And that's okay. That's not failure. That's life. She looked at her family, at the community of architects and designers who'd become colleagues and friends, at the young mentees watching with hope in their eyes. The library where I got my second chance needed complete structural restoration. It was broken almost past saving, but it survived because people believed it was worth fighting for, and I survived for the same reason, because people showed up and fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Emma held up a photograph, the same heart-shaped cookie Daniel had shown at the library opening, preserved carefully all these years. Someone once told me that even broken things are still beautiful. That cracks don't mean worthless. They mean human. I'm standing here today as living proof that he was right. My cracks, my breaks, my years of hiding, they didn't disqualify me from happiness or success. They were just part of my foundation. The part that taught me empathy and resilience and how to design spaces that hold broken people gently while they heal. The applause was thunderous, but Emma barely heard it. She was looking at Daniel, who was crying openly while the twins teased him about being emotional. She was thinking about Mrs. June, now 81 and finally retired, but still stopping by the library cafe to make sure they're doing things right. She was thinking about the community center that would break ground next month, about the lives it would touch, about the ripple effects of one person choosing to try again. After the ceremony, they went out for ice cream, the same shop they'd visited on that first family outing 10 years ago. The twins ordered elaborate sundaes, Daniel got his standard cookies and cream, And Emma chose mint chocolate chip because Lila had been right all those years ago. It was scientifically the best flavor. "I'm proud of you, Em," Nora said, in that serious way of hers that hadn't changed despite her teenage sophistication. "For the award, but also for everything else. For being brave enough to try again when you could have kept hiding. For choosing us," Lila added. "For staying even when things got hard. For being exactly who we needed." Emma felt the familiar sting of tears. Happy ones this time, grateful ones. "You three are the best decision I ever made, even if I didn't make it consciously that first night." "We made the decision for you," Lila said, with the confidence of someone who'd always known exactly what she wanted. "We saw you and we knew. You were ours before you knew you were ours." "That's a little stalker-ish, Lila," Daniel said mildly. "That's love, Dad. Love means showing up and fighting for people even when they haven't asked you to. Em taught us that." They finished their ice cream and drove home through the city, past the library that had started everything, past Maple Bloom's old location that was now a yoga studio, past all the landmarks of their shared history. And Emma thought about the shy baker who'd sat alone in a cafe waiting for a date who never came. She thought about how that night could have been just another disappointment in a long line of disappointments. How easily she could have missed everything that came after, the love, the family, the career, the life she'd built from broken pieces. But two little girls in pink coats had refused to let that story end in loneliness. They'd fought for their father's second chance, not knowing they were fighting for Emma's too. They'd shown up when showing up mattered, and they'd reminded Emma that being seen wasn't something to fear. It was something to fight for. That night, after the girls were in bed and Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch mid-movie, Emma walked through their home, touching the evidence of their life together. Photos on the walls showing the twins growing up, Emma and Daniel's wedding portrait, family vacations and ordinary moments captured and displayed, architectural models she'd built for various projects, the twins' artwork from every age, the heart-shaped cookie in its preservation frame that Daniel had never thrown away. She stopped in front of the window overlooking their backyard where Daniel had finally built the elaborate treehouse he'd promised the girls. It was magnificent, multi-level, with secret compartments and a telescope. And yes, a slide that was better than Tyler Johnson's. Emma could see Daniel's architectural precision in every joint and beam, but she could also see her influence. The way the space flowed naturally, the reading nook with perfect natural light, the small details that made it more than just a structure. It made it a space where children could dream and play and feel safe. She'd designed that safety, with Daniel, with intention, with all the broken pieces of herself that had learned how to be gentle with other broken things. Emma picked up her phone and opened her messages, scrolling to a conversation she'd saved but rarely looked at. The very first text Daniel had sent her, the morning after that chaotic first meeting at the library. "This is Daniel. Lila insisted I save your number under Emma who makes good cookies, but I overruled her. Thank you again for last night, for coming, for being kind to my daughters, for not calling the police on them for their unauthorized adventure. Dinner Friday? I promise to actually show up this time." She'd been so scared when she received that message. Scared of trying again, scared of failing again, scared of being not enough again. But she'd said yes anyway. She'd chosen courage over safety, possibility over certainty. And that choice had changed everything. Emma looked at her sleeping husband, at the home they'd built, at the life that had emerged from one evening of choosing to be brave. She thought about all the people who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Daniel, the twins, Mrs. June, Rachel. She thought about the community she'd found, the career she'd reclaimed, the version of herself she'd become. And she understood finally and completely that Marcus had been wrong. She wasn't too quiet or too small or not enough. She never had been. She was exactly enough. She always had been. She just needed to meet two little girls in pink coats and a grieving architect to help her see it. Emma turned off the lights and went to bed, crawling in beside Daniel, who mumbled sleepily and pulled her close. And as she drifted off to sleep, she thought about the shy baker who'd waited alone in a cafe for a date who never came. That girl was still part of her, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She was building. She was loving. She was staying. And sometimes that was the bravest thing of all.